Acteon Brondern, a Transcendent, begins his second awakening and a purple vortex engulfs him inside the ritual array. Dozens of control stones strain and shatter. Lilliope, a guide, winces as red shards rain through the air and pushes herself forward, trying to contain the surge. Each cracking stone screams to Lilliope's rational mind that she should run for her life, and she admits that if she stays, she will die. Still, she cannot abandon Acteon during his second awakening. She gathers herself, channels stabilizing intent, and moves through the violet currents toward him despite the danger. Lilliope reaches for a red control stone and forces guiding energy into the array through contact. Acteon floats inside the surge, eyes unfocused as raw magic lashes around him. She presses her gloved hand forward and forces a stabilizing current through him, making physical contact the only way to steady his overwhelming power. Lilliope shouts Acteon's name to break through the maelstrom, but the condition remains volatile, and the purple currents continue to tear at the hall. She grabs Acteon's lapel and orders him to get it together, forcing a human anchor into the storm of magic. He groans, and the attempt barely registers. Lilliope realizes he is still not fully present, and she steels herself for a stronger intervention because the current has not let him come back. Fear whispers to Lilliope to run and save herself, but she forces the thought aside. If she flees, Acteon will die where he stands. She rejects escape and commits to full contact guiding despite the risk, understanding that leaving now would mean abandoning him for certain death. Lilliope clutches the brooch at Acteon's chest and promises consequences even if he is not himself, because she cannot let him be a danger without accountability. She reminds herself that if she dies, her little brother Hyestin will be left entirely alone, and that possibility steels her resolve to escalate contact and hold him in place until he stabilizes. Lilliope warns Acteon through the bond that his future choices will shape Hyestin's life, pleading for him to snap out of the spiral. She wraps him in a tight embrace and forces more guiding energy through direct contact as blue light arcs around them. With nothing left, Lilliope decides on a last-ditch measure. She warns Acteon that any mention of first kisses or responsibility after this will be met with lethal retribution, then leans in and kisses him to anchor his emotions and magic. The contact sends a stabilizing light through the array and finally tames the worst of the surge. A caption explains the awakened from the romance fantasy novel Taming the Catastrophic, class Transcendent. The awakened fall into two categories: Transcendents who gain superhuman magic, and guides who stabilize their dangerous surges through direct contact. Guides are introduced as those trained to control and stabilize. Transcendents, magical surges, and the awakened are treated as both weapons and national assets. The setting is named as the Kingdom of Lagre, where state institutions oversee scouting, training, and the weaponization of the awakened. The kingdom built a military academy to scout potential awakened during their first awakening and to guide them through the second. Guiding is shown as hands joining and channeling stabilization through direct touch. Lilliope, narrating, realizes the implications and admits to herself that the system makes guides responsible for others' lives. Lilliope reveals she was isekai'd into a second awakening scene and possessed an extra guide named Lilliope Ordis, the expendable guide slated to die during the S-rank male lead Acteon's second awakening. She recognizes the plot of the novel and understands exactly where the original story would end for her. Acteon Brondern is introduced as the male lead and an illegitimate child of a ducal house known for producing transcendence. Being a conventionally troubled male lead, he endures trauma that sets his character arc. The incident leaves Acteon deeply scarred and emotionally unstable. The S-rank guide and female lead Millia eventually guides him through his broken state, and once Millia takes him in, the story shifts into intense scenes that the novel disguises as guiding. The male lead's volatility is emphasized. Lilliope remembers that, in the original plot, a villain twist involves her own little brother Hyestin becoming the antagonist. The author kills her sibling in a tragic way to close the arc, and she questions the cruelty of a story that consigns him to a proper antagonist's death. In the aftermath of the academy, rank student Didier Phil nervously asks if he did anything wrong when Lilliope flinches. She realizes she spoke aloud by accident. A gray-haired professor confirms Didier's rank and politely asks if Lilliope is okay, beginning the standard post-guiding protocol. Lilliope assures the professor that she merely held the student's hand to guide her, and nothing more. The professor instructs them to rest now that the awakening is over, and warns to report any delayed side effects. He also notes that guides are already far outnumbered by transcendents, and that monitoring will continue. The professor bluntly reminds her that a guide's body does not belong solely to them, but to the nation. Lilliope answers that she will keep that in mind and thanks him. She thinks privately that this place treats even children like weapons and resumes, ushering the next student through the academy routines. Walking outside, Lilliope reflects that if she had followed the original plot, she would have died without understanding why. She checks her control stone bracelet, which logs the date and time of each guiding session. Reading the timestamp, she calculates the timeline and realizes there are only 6 months left before the male lead's arc reaches the academy. The realization that she has only 6 months crystallizes into a survival plan. Lilliope decides the original plot no longer matters, and that she must change events to survive. She resolves to set a concrete goal and begin changing things now so Hyestin and she can avoid the tragic fate laid out in the novel. She steadies herself and affirms a single guiding principle, a goal to protect Hyestin and rewrite their fate. Lilliope adopts a shorthand name for herself and steels her resolve, setting the first steps of her plan in motion. In the professor's office, she places a leave of absence form on the desk and tells him she wants to go home for a while. The professor calls for a private discussion and agrees to consider the request, signaling that this leave will allow her to act beyond the Academy's immediate oversight. To be determined. In private, the professor asks whether she experienced any physical or mental side effects, or whether Didier behaved inappropriately during the guiding. Lilliope says she is fine, and admits she misses her younger brother. She explains that Hyestin has been alone since she awakened, and that her leave would allow her to see him. The professor agrees to approve the leave for now, but warns that he will not be so lenient if similar incidents recur. He admits he is making an exception because of her, reminding her that guides are valuable assets destined for the battlefield. Lilliope notes the practical reason and promises to comply. As she prepares to leave, the professor reminds her that any unauthorized guiding is instantly reported to him and the surveillance team via the control stone bracelet. He asks her to be careful and return in one piece. Lilliope hesitates at the warning and then agrees to follow the rule, though privately she already has another plan. She forces a cheerful smile, agrees to try to be careful, and bids the professor farewell. Lilliope steps out of the academy into sunlight and flowers, presenting the calm face of a student taking leave, while planning how to change the coming months. Lilliope states her purpose plainly: to change her fate and Hyestin's. The chapter closes with decorative title art and production credits, marking the end of the prologue and the start of her active attempt to rewrite the novel's events. She takes a magic train directly to Count Lorraine's estate, the place where Hyestin lives in the original novel. The train deposits her at the estate station, and she carries her small suitcase toward the grand entrance, determined to find her brother and intervene early. A full portrait frames her moment of resolve, and the first survival step begins. At the estate gate, a groundsman greets her politely with a hello, and she returns the greeting as she prepares to move into the grounds and gather information about Hyestin's whereabouts. She tells the groundsman that she came because there is someone she wants to see, and explains that her goal is to block the original novel's exploitation from the start. A note clarifies that in the original story, Hyestin lived at the Lorraine estate as a pre-awakened sponsored by the family. The narration reveals that the Lorraine family was a terrible sponsor. Blinded by profit, the Count and his son forced the young Hyestin to manifest early, beating and abusing him daily to provoke power for their gain. Those memories become trauma and warp his emotions, setting the path that turns him into the hidden final boss. In the original timeline, Hyestin vows revenge and eventually kills the entire Lorraine family in a gruesome act born of accumulated trauma. Lilliope admits she does not mourn the family's fate, but she refuses to accept that Hyestin must live the miserable life that drives him to such an end, and she resolves to change his future. Walking the estate paths, Lilliope states plainly that she does not want Hyestin to endure a miserable life. She tells the groundsman that her younger brother lives here and that it has been a while since she last saw him. He offers to ask around and help search the estate, and she gratefully accepts his assistance. The groundsman assumes she is a visiting relative of the staff, which Lilliope notes relaxes security. He jokes about tagging along when she visits the capital, and then offers to show her around the estate. She inwardly recognizes his obvious flirtation but agrees to the tour to advance her search. He slips her in through a side entrance and they walk past hedges and fountains toward the inner grounds. He asks for her brother's name, and she gives an alias to avoid suspicion. They continue together, the groundsman's easy company keeping her movements low profile as she searches the estate. He teases that noble women usually have flower-themed names and guesses Daisy, but Lilliope ignores the banter and points to a distant facility asking what it is. He answers that it is the training yard, and warns that the yard is rough and probably not a place for a lady, as it contains scenes best kept from polite eyes. He explains that lately the Count and the young master have been forcing a pre-awakened to do harsh training in order to accelerate manifestation of powers, and that the sessions have been brutal. She asks what that has to do with her going there, and despite his nervous protests, she heads straight toward the training yard anyway. At the training yard, she stops and sees it all at once. The young master strikes a pale boy, and the blows land with casual cruelty. Hyestin sits cowering, hair dry and brittle, and his body scrawny like a twig. Lilliope's breath steadies, and she resolves to act decisively to stop the abuse. A close inspection confirms Hyestin's condition, hair dry and brittle, and his frame dangerously thin from neglect and training. Seeing him like that calms Lilliope's fear into a quiet resolve, and she prepares to step between him and the next blow, despite not having guide mana of her own to spare. Guides are trained to control their emotions, but Lilliope produces a small blue refined mana bead and prepares the one-time resource she has carried for emergencies. She holds the bead between her fingers and acknowledges its bitterness, knowing that few could remain calm after seeing Hyestin like this, and then she swallows the bead to fuel a single intervention. The condensed mana ignites along her skin like blue circuits, and Lilliope feels the power surge through her limbs. She sprints forward toward Hyestin and the attacker, surprising the groundsman who yelps at the sudden release. A red-haired adult nearby, likely a retainer, also notices the unexpected magic flaring in the yard. The young master recoils and shouts in alarm, asking rhetorically why a Transcendent would appear in the yard. Lilliope answers with a controlled flood of blue current that runs along the ground and closes the distance. Hyestin looks up and calls her Lippy, and she plants a wave of mana between him and his abuser to protect him. The current slams into the young master and throws him backward, his scream cutting through the yard. Lilliope states calmly that she is not a Transcendent and that she is acting because she witnessed him kicking her little brother. She holds the mana shield around Hyestin, maintaining protective pressure to prevent any further blows. She snaps her fingers and the current intensifies into a binding torrent. The young master convulses and screams as the blue energy restrains him. Fingers clenched in the yard, the current is applied with control to subdue rather than maim, leaving him hurt but alive as Lilliope enforces immediate accountability. An adult bystander rushes forward to protest that Lilliope is overstepping, but she keeps the current and asks the attacker if he knows what pain feels like. The young master begs and screams that it hurts and then collapses into frantic apologies. Lilliope holds the margin of power until he finally says he is sorry and submits to being held accountable. Hyestin reaches for Lilliope's wrist in concern and notices the control stone bracelet burning hot from the monitoring signal. He frantically asks if she is crazy, worried about her being reported, and then admits he does not want to be left alone again. Lilliope teases that if she were jailed, he would have to learn to live on his own, but her tone is soft and protective. Hyestin blushes and protests that he is not a child when Lilliope chides him gently, still shaken from the moment. Off, camera voices call for Lidman and an inspection team, and Lilliope looks up and remarks that the inspectors have arrived early. The scene closes with the imminent arrival of oversight at the estate. Count Lorraine bursts into the front courtyard and demands to know what is happening. A servant points at Lilliope and accuses her of attacking the young master. Inspectors step forward and report Lilliope Ortis for unauthorized mana use. The siblings find themselves ringed by official authority in the estate yard. Lilliope bows her head slightly and tells the inspector she will accept punishment without excuses. She holds Hyestin close and, without pleading, shifts the conversation toward a larger fact about transcendence and royal favor. She reminds the inspector that His Majesty and his court take a close interest in promising transcendence, implying there are higher stakes than this single complaint. The lead inspector says their duty is to protect pre-awakened individuals and asks Lilliope what she means. She states plainly that the entire Lorraine household has repeatedly abused, beaten, and humiliated a pre-awakened child. She declares she has come to report the family to the crown, putting the complaint at the level of official investigation. Lilliope stands with her hand to her chest and reaffirms that she is reporting the abuse of a pre-awakened child. Her posture is steady and formal as she refuses to back down. The declaration is made clear and unambiguous, handing the matter to the inspectors to resolve. Count Lorraine laughs off the claim and taunts Lilliope, calling the idea of abuse absurd. He points to the injured young master and demands she be arrested for attacking an unawakened person. The household rallies to his side, trying to turn the scene into a case against Lilliope rather than an inquiry into the young master's behavior. The lead inspector names Lilliope Ortis and states that unauthorized mana use is a serious crime regardless of motive. He acknowledges the complaint but keeps a measured tone, signaling that the law must be followed while leaving room for context to be considered. Lilliope remains beside Hyestin, the two of them the focus of the inquiry. The inspector cites royal law, explaining that Lorraine's explanation violates statutes set by the king. He announces an immediate lockdown. No one from the count's household may leave the estate. An investigation will begin at once. His authority manifests as a chain, like restraint of magic, to enforce the order and make the lockdown unmistakable. The inspector lays out the possible penalties if the abuse is proven: loss of patron status, confiscation of assets, and in extreme cases, even capital punishment. Count Lorraine protests that the boy has not shown awakening, but the inspector replies that even pre-awakened individuals are classified as state property and must be protected. The stakes for the family are made painfully clear. The inspector warns that damaging the king's property or status carries severe consequences and then declares that Lilliope Ortis will be taken into custody by the Awakened Oversight Bureau. He moves to place control chains on her, and the enforcement magic coils toward her. The movement draws a strange, dark blue reaction from Hyestin that catches everyone's attention. Lilliope reacts with disbelief as dark fractures of energy crack the air around them. Inspectors move to take her into custody and struggle to hold Hyestin when he resists. He shouts that he cannot let them take her, and Lilliope reaches for him, urging him to calm down as she tries to hold the situation steady while officials wrestle him into compliance. Lilliope tells Hyestin to calm down and repeats that he must steady himself. Her voice is low and controlled as she focuses on stabilizing him to prevent another surge. The mana cracks in the air remind everyone that his reactions are volatile, and that she needs him to hold back for their safety. Lilliope feels her body refusing to obey fully, a sign the mana bead she consumed is affecting her control. Inspectors shout and struggle as Hyestin's aura spikes once more, and they call to restrain him. He fights their hold, threatening not to let go, and Lilliope fears he may enter a berserk mode that would endanger everyone nearby. A brief transition frames Lilliope's reasoning. She notes that although her actions may appear impulsive, every step is calculated. If Hyestin will awaken as an S, rank Transcendent, she intends to channel that power into protection rather than revenge. She frames a long-term plan to guide his awakening toward survival and control. In detention, Lilliope sits with control, stone chains glowing around her wrists when a blonde prince arrives. He greets her with a light tone and introduces himself as Prince Isidore. The visit is unexpected and draws her attention, marking the entrance of a high-level actor into their predicament. Lilliope answers the prince formally, calling him Your Highness. Isidore smiles and admits he is confused by her earlier remarks, but he sets aside banter and signals they should get down to business. His easy demeanor masks that he intends to handle the situation with efficiency. Isidore asks what rank Lilliope expects for her brother. She answers that the potential rank of a pre-awakened cannot be known with certainty. He replies that certain signs can hint at a future rank, and suggests Hyestin displays those signs, studying her reaction to confirm his assessment. The prince tells Lilliope that he is not trying to use her brother, but rather to protect him. She repeats his words quietly, weighing the offer. She remains cautious but listens as he frames protection as the motive behind his intervention and patronage proposal. Isidore points out that Lilliope took a sudden leave mid-semester to come see her brother and asks how she found out about the abuse. He presses the timing and motive, curious why she acted so decisively. The question forces her to account for how she learned the household's hidden cruelty. Isidore suggests she must have suspected Hyestin would awaken and says that Transcendent's minds are fragile like glass. He warns that prolonged abuse risks catastrophic outcomes if left unchecked. Lilliope takes in his words and nods silently, absorbing how dangerous neglect can become for an awakening mind. The prince profiles Lilliope and calls her a B-rank guide, not the highest rank but capable and committed. He reasons that someone who rushed to a pre-awakened sibling's side must have one motive above all, to protect the younger brother. His read on her intentions is confident and direct. Lilliope admits she did not expect him to connect the dots so cleanly. Isidore smiles and calls her someone trying to survive, then offers a concrete plan to match her and Hyestin with a more suitable patron family. She listens carefully, alert for what house he means, and what that arrangement will demand. Isidore declares that Count Lorraine will be stripped of patron status and noble title, and that half of the confiscated assets will be paid into Hyestin's account as compensation. He reassures Lilliope she will be released once he leaves the room, and that a representative from the chosen patron family will take responsibility for them. The legal and material penalties are immediate and substantial. Lilliope responds to Isidore with a cautious thank you, still processing the swift generosity. He teases her and delivers a compliment about her unusual manner. She answers with formal courtesy, calling him Your Highness, and their exchange remains light and politely flirtatious while the real arrangements are set in motion. Isidore informs her that, once he departs, someone from the new patron family will come to guide her. He leaves with a final reassurance that Brondern is different from Lorraine. Left alone, Lilliope utters the name Brondern under her breath, and realizes the full implications of being placed under a ducal roof. Lilliope recognizes Brondern as the ducal house of Acteon, the man tied to her canonical death in another timeline. The realization hits her like cold water, and she silently panics, keeping her face composed while her mind reels at the proximity to the person who will complicate everything. Outside in the warm light of evening, Hyestin rushes to Lilliope and grabs her hands, breathless with relief. He asks if she is hurt and scolds her for acting recklessly, saying she would have been in serious trouble if not for the prince's intervention. She comforts him, and they move away from the detention site together. Lilliope complains with light sarcasm that she helps him and only gets scolded, and teases that he still will not call her sis. Hyestin snaps that this is not the point, and starts to protest, agitation still present. The sibling banter hides the nervous energy the incident left behind. Lilliope tells Hyestin she is fine and to stop pretending to cry, and he denies it with a huff. A well-dressed retainer approaches, introduces himself as Blair from House Brondern, and politely says he will escort them both to the Brondern estate. Lilliope notes inwardly how quickly the household responded to the prince's call. Blair falls into step beside them and leads the siblings through the gates toward the Brondern estate. Hyestin walks protectively at Lilliope's side as they are guided across the grounds and into the ducal property. The transition is quiet, with the weight of what just happened settling around them. They arrive before an enormous ducal facade and pause on the gravel to take it in. Hyestin remarks at how disgustingly huge the place is, and Lilliope confirms that Brondern's wealth and reach explain the prince's earlier assurance. They understand they are now under the roof of a family, with resources far beyond Lorraine's. Inside the grand entry hall, Blair remarks that it is fortunate Hyestin has nothing to carry, and the young man confirms he has no luggage. Lilliope studies Blair's calm friendliness and wonders if he is confident he can handle Hyestin. She resolves to keep watch and to prevent any patron from seizing control of Hyestin's future. Hand in hand, Lilliope and Hyestin walk toward the main doors. She scans the estate and silently sets a plan: keep any outside force from reaching Hyestin, secure his path into the military academy, and manage the timing of his first manifestation. Every step is now measured with future safety in mind. Lilliope recalls the original timeline where Crown Prince Siblin preyed on a grieving Hyestin and twisted him toward revenge. The memory shows the boy trapped in dark purple energy and despair. Back in the present, she realizes Isidore's referral to Brondern does not neutralize Siblin's long-term threat, and she decides the safest path is academy enrollment with her constant oversight. Walking the halls, Lilliope studies Hyestin's behavior and manifestation cues. He notices and asks why she keeps staring, and she jokes that she is wondering when he will grow up. In her head, she reasons he will need triggers and careful conditions for his first manifestation, and that a stable environment with another Transcendent nearby is the best buffer against outbursts. A voice calls Blair's name, and a tall, dark-haired man appears, Cathedral Brondern. He tells the retainer that their father is waiting, and Lilliope registers him immediately. She mentally notes Cathedral as a significant figure and braces for contact with Acteon, despite the accelerated introductions. Cathedral apologizes for a delay and tells Blair they should wrap things up and file their report. Lilliope watches his measured movements and precise posture and notes that he moves like a veteran Transcendent. She reads his social polish as evidence of leadership and assesses him as someone who could shape household dynamics decisively. At the top of the grand staircase, Lilliope introduces herself and her younger brother, Lilliope Ordis and Hyestin Ordis. Cathedral listens and offers no personal introduction in return, maintaining a reserved distance. Lilliope marks him inwardly as a person she does not trust and limits the exposure of their names and details. Cathedral says they are on a tight schedule and will be shown to their rooms immediately. Hyestin whispers to Lilliope, asking whether they really have to remain under Brondern's roof. She replies with dry humor that if he does not want to stay, he should simply manifest now, masking urgency with a little levity as she pressures him to stabilize his timeline. A voice calls the name Acteon, and Lilliope looks up to see him entering the hall on leave from school. The caption clarifies that Cathedral is Acteon's older brother and the household's second male lead. The siblings now stand within the ducal orbit that will shape their immediate future. Lilliope reflects on Cathedral's reputation: sensitive and quick-tempered, later becoming fixated on Millia after she reformed him. He mutters about the earlier commotion and moves on. Lilliope admits she never took to him and notes that his volatility could create friction between guides and transcendents under his authority. Cathedral tells Acteon that it must have gotten to him, but that dinner time is near and he should prepare. Acteon refuses the idea of dining in the same room with an unmanifested B-rank guide present, hinting at rank prejudice. Cathedral replies that Duke Locke will not allow skipping the meal, underscoring strict household protocol. On the balcony, Cathedral muses that if their father sponsors an unmanifested child, that implies a decent expected rank, and he grumbles about the ranking system's oddities. They proceed into the main hall and enter the dining scene with the careful spacing required by protocol as Lilliope and Hyestin take their places. Hyestin asks why noble families behave so ruthlessly, and Lilliope answers that much of it is a hierarchy war over succession rights. She explains that at Brondern, succession is determined by manifestation rank, which makes every potential transcendent a political asset. Acteon stands slightly apart at the table, a visual sign of the family's internal fracture. Lilliope recalls the Claire incident, a violent episode tied to Cathedral's twin that left deep wounds in the family. She expected Acteon to be more broken by that history, but she observes he manages restraint for now. The memory explains the tense undercurrent at the table and informs her risk assessment for interacting with the ducal household. Servants place the courses as the household settles at the table. Duke Locke Brondern presides and initiates the conversation by probing the siblings' situation. He asks about Hyestin's promise as a potential recipient under Brondern's sponsorship, effectively putting the boy on display for evaluation while the family watches his reactions. Lilliope answers the flattery with polite modesty, saying Hyestin has not yet manifested. Duke Locke compliments Prince Isidore's instincts, indicating confidence in the prince's judgment about the boy's promise. He presses why a guide of Lilliope's rank should be required to stay at Brondern. Lilliope internally reaffirms she must not become attached and must preserve an exit plan for the siblings. A dossier panel introduces Glock Brondern as the head of House Brondern and an influential S-rank Transcendent. A system brief explains imprinting. When a Transcendent and a guide form an imprint, their mana signatures pre-synchronize. That bond creates a steadfast resonance, enabling immediate and stable guiding when needed. The system note continues, stating that imprinting enables fast and stable guiding at any time by pre-synchronizing the partner's unique mana. The text frames imprinting as institutional best practice for high-risk deployments because it creates immediate compatibility between guide and transcendent. The brief notes the trade-off. Imprinting binds a guide exclusively to the imprinted partner, acting as an oath of loyalty and limiting future freedom. It then reveals a personal consequence at Brondern. Duke Glock refused to imprint with his lawful wife and was unfaithful, and Acteon was born into the resulting fragmented household and political mess. A backstory montage shows Acteon losing his mother early and growing up wary around the Duchess. The narration explains that the Duke regarded him as a potentially useful, unmanifested asset rather than a son, and paid little attention to his upbringing. That neglect shaped the Duke's household and left Acteon isolated in his formative years. A narration explains that imprinting creates instant mana synchronization between a Transcendent and their guide for high resonance compatibility. Lilliope Ordis eats politely, while remembering that the Duke once broke the Duchess's engagement for a supposedly more compatible bride, and still refused to imprint, choosing infidelity instead. Duke Glock Brondern drinks and considers the siblings as social climbers, and Lilliope thinks that she will be looked down on if she stays in his household. She tightens her resolve to keep Hyestin safe and to preserve a clear exit plan. At the table, Duke Glock comments that a low guide rank could tarnish Brondern prestige and makes a cutting remark about expectations. Lilliope keeps her face controlled and thinks she should offer some polite words, but her priority remains Hyestin's safety, rather than defending the household's reputation. Hyestin notices Lilliope's restraint and watches the Duke with a careful expression, ready to protect his sister if needed. Lilliope tells Hyestin she will return to the military academy in half a year and go straight to her post after graduation, so she will not form deep ties in Brondern. Hyestin protests quietly that she cannot just leave yet, and Lilliope answers that for the next 6 months she will make sure no one whispers about a B rank staying at the estate. She smiles and asks him not to worry, offering a plan to keep their time here temporary and discreet. Lilliope decides she will only change what she can in 6 months and then leave Brondern for good. She accepts the balance between protecting Hyestin and the legal and social risks of staying. She reassures herself that measured action and a planned exit are the sensible course while she keeps watch over the boy she came to protect. Duke Glock remarks that if Lilliope had been S-class then things would be different, and calls it a shame that she is only B rank. Lilliope replies tersely that she is not interested in his favor and keeps her composure. The Duke offers a formal courtesy, saying he hopes she will have a comfortable stay until her return, and his words land as polite dismissal rather than genuine welcome. Customer advertising panel placeholder. Dinner adjourns when Duke Glock stands and asks everyone to go up. He offers his hand to the Duchess and she accepts, rising obediently. Lilliope watches them leave in silence, reading the household hierarchy in every deferential gesture. The exit makes the power imbalance clear and confirms for her that social survival here will require caution and a strict timeline. Alone after dinner, Lilliope breathes out, glad the tension passed. Cassio Brondern appears and remarks that the performance at the table was impressive, asking if she has always lived placating people. He calls it a talent in his own dry way. Lilliope answers simply that she does not like drawing attention and prefers discretion, keeping the exchange brief to avoid escalation. Cassel presses, asking if Lilliope cannot help but be cautious even if she wanted to be different. She thinks that his leave of absence must have been caused by the Claire incident and understands that trauma drives his distance. She keeps answers short to avoid provoking him further while tracking the emotional currents in the room. A flashback explains that Claire was Cassiel's fraternal twin and meant more to him as family than as a fellow S-class Transcendent. The memory shifts as Claire resents the power thrust on her and the pressure to fight, and that internal conflict grows into instability. Lilliope watches the fragments of that past and registers how the pressure of expectations warped a once beloved sibling. The sequence continues as Claire's mind shatters during deployment and she rampages, killing and dying with her guide. The panels show the brutal collapse and the symbolic shattered rings that follow a guide's death. For Cassiel, that night marks the loss of his family in an instant and seeds a directionless fury that will shape his choices going forward. The flashback pivots to Acteon Brondern, who witnessed the gruesome death of Arin, Claire's guide, the one adult who had always been kind to him. The shocking sight imprints on the boy. That incident gives Acteon a deep trauma and a fear of guides, mortality that will influence how he handles relationships and trust in the years to come. Cassiel is left with a directionless rage at a country that used transcendence as weapons and then lost them. At the table, the conversation resumes and Lilliope tries to re-engage, only to have Cassiel snap and accuse her of ignoring him. His irritation escalates the tension and forces her to remain guarded as she balances protecting Hyestin with avoiding further provocation. When Lilliope apologizes for being lost in thought, Cassiel orders them to leave, bluntly telling Hyestin and her to go. Hyestin tenses, but Lilliope thinks of Prince Isidore's instructions about proper distance and notes that the Duke's standards should have prevented such public humiliation. Cassiel replies coldly that the place does not change his opinion, and he maintains the hostility even as the siblings stand to exit. Hyestin takes Lilliope's hand and apologizes for their sudden departure, telling the table they will excuse themselves now. He moves with purpose and pulls her away before Cassiel can escalate, leaving the other guests calling after them. Cassiel watches them go, storing the moment for a later confrontation, while Lilliope keeps her face composed as they speed toward their quarters. Acteon sees Hyestin and Lilliope hurry away and follows them with measured steps. Lilliope calls for Hyestin to wait as she slows the pace, but Hyestin prioritizes getting them away from the dining room crowd. Acteon watches from a distance, interested and guarded, as the siblings move through the estate corridor toward privacy. In the corridor, Hyestin asks sharply if Lilliope provoked the Lydman-Lorraine incident to create this distraction. She admits she did, explaining that arranging a scene would force the estate's hand, and he reacts with anger and concern about public humiliation. Lilliope tells him that their priority must be safety, and warns that if rank alone is the reason she is treated poorly, then she will have nothing to do with the family. He absorbs her protective determination. Lilliope tells Hyestin she does want the admission because she intends to get him registered within 6 months and secure their future. He asks why she reappeared without notice, and she explains that her mana reacted at the Count's house, signaling an imminent manifestation. She says she acted on that feeling to protect him, and he wrestles with gratitude and suspicion as they continue moving through the estate. Lilliope admits she avoided sending letters because she feared creating leverage against Hyestin, and he answers bluntly that she should stop offering excuses. She softens, reminding him that now they are together and 3 months remain before registration closes, so he will be fine if the manifestation happens in time. She asks him to trust his big sister, and he allows a shadow of relief to show as he listens to her plan. On the balcony, Lilliope advises Hyestin that Duke Glock treats rank and output like a chess player, sacrificing people for visible results. She points out that Brondern will value performance over well-being, and that those ambitions can consume the people around him. She urges caution and suggests they keep expectations measured while navigating the household's political currents. Lilliope tells Hyestin that he only needs to accept the patron support for his manifestation because this is a national policy, and he owes nothing to Brondern beyond that. She confesses she does not want him dragged into the Duke's greed like someone she knows, and urges him not to pry into the family secrets. Hyestin replies okay, and Castle watches the exchange from a distance, skeptical and observant. Footsteps announce Acteon as he intercepts the two and comments that they seem to know a lot about the estate. Lilliope worries he has figured out their plan to accept help and leave after manifestation, and prepares a cautious, limited response. Hyestin stands behind her, ready to step in if the conversation turns hostile. Lilliope asks Hyestin to go on ahead and reassures him she will speak with Acteon for a minute, asking him not to worry. Hyestin hesitates and then warns her not to take too long before he walks away, leaving the two alone. The brief separation sets the stage for a frank exchange that Lilliope has to manage carefully. Acteon tells Lilliope that his family might suffer the same fate as Claire and warns her to be cautious. He speaks from fear, not cruelty, and she lets him vent because the reference to Claire's catastrophe is raw and personal. Lilliope keeps her answers measured to avoid exposing their full plan while acknowledging the real risk he fears. Lilliope deflects by saying no one wants to get involved in someone else's messy family problems, but Acteon presses her, asking how she knows the specifics about the Brondern situation. She senses his test and prepares to respond without revealing confidential sources or meta-knowledge, weighing what to give away to maintain his trust and avoid immediate hostility. Acteon demands to know how Lilliope found out about the family's problems, scanning her for any sign of insider knowledge. She reassesses, deciding to blend public rumor with verifiable facts to avoid exposing confidential sources. She prepares a careful explanation that will sound plausible without admitting to forbidden access or surveillance. Lilliope chooses to cite widely reported events rather than any secret source, planning to filter rumors into a plausible explanation. Acteon repeats the question, and she decides to reference an S-class prodigy's death that shocked the public. She knows acting too informed would be dangerous in front of him, so she frames her knowledge as careful observation of public speculation. Lilliope explains there was an announcement that an S-class Transcendent who graduated early died suddenly in battle, and that the event shocked society. She says the prodigy's death generated wild rumors, and that she simply filtered the public noise to a reasonable hypothesis. Acteon listens as she frames her awareness as the result of analyzing common speculation, rather than inside knowledge. She lists the rumor categories floating after the prodigy's death: slain by a newly emerged S-class monster, suicide, or assassination by a foreign nation. Lilliope says she filtered out the nonsense to arrive at a plausible theory, and avoids naming Claire directly as proof, keeping the explanation at the level of reasoned public inference. Lilliope admits she could end up in the same situation, being sent to the front at a young age and told to kill, which explains why she is cautious. Acteon hears her and tests whether her words are sympathy or strategy. He listens intently as she ties personal caution to systemic exploitation rather than to a desire to meddle in his family's affairs. Acteon says that risk and duty are part of a manifested one's role and pushes back against Lilliope's rationale for prying. She counters that no sane parent would intentionally shove their child onto a battlefield in the name of duty, and implies that Duke Glock's actions are ethically suspect. The exchange sharpens the difference between their worldviews while keeping their conversation focused on safety. Acteon acknowledges he understands where Lilliope is coming from and admits he has heard about her circumstances. Lilliope says the safety of her brother and herself is what matters, and that she warned Hyestin not to get involved with the Duke's family just in case. She suggests that even the Duke and his brothers seem to prefer keeping distance, and she asks if he agrees with that assessment. Acteon says he understands and apologizes for carelessly bringing up Lilliope's family affairs. He calls her actions reckless and warns that if his older brother or father had heard those words, her sponsorship might have been revoked. Lilliope registers the social risk and adjusts her appraisals of how much disclosure she can safely offer inside the estate. Lilliope says she feels no desire to show sincerity to people who do not treat them as human, and she begins to say that they have never had certain kinds of contact. Acteon interrupts and tells her not to say it never happened, referring to an earlier incident that bound them together in a way neither should dismiss. The moment tightens the unspoken history between them. Elsewhere, Cassiel complains to Duke Locke that from the moment he arrived, he was treated like he did not exist, and that servants even looked down on him. The Duke hears him with a controlled face, while Lilliope receives garments from a maid whose brisk service underlines the household's snobbery toward outsiders. The episode confirms for Lilliope that social contempt runs deep in the estate. Acteon says there is a misunderstanding he wants to clear up, and insists he never treated Lilliope as if she did not exist, only that he kept his distance. He touches his chest ornament and reveals the reason is Aaron, the guide who died, connecting his caution to a traumatic memory. Lilliope takes in the confession and its emotional weight. Lilliope realizes that Acteon's cold distance comes from a fear of attachment after Aaron and Claire's tragedy, and she offers him a gentle out, saying he does not have to force himself to talk if it is too hard. Acteon's breathing accelerates, and Lilliope senses that the stress is more than emotional, registering the first signs of physiological instability. Pipe. Acteon suddenly staggers, clutching his sternum as a violent turbulence coils around him, and Lilliope moves immediately to support him. She calls his name and recognizes the early signs of a first awakening in the way mana spikes at his core and spreads to his limbs. The instability escalates rapidly, and she braces to respond despite the legal risks of unauthorized guiding. Lilliope worries that Acteon's first awakening is happening now, and she braces for the worst, aware that an uncontrolled surge can lead to rampage. She asks Hyestin to call Blair for help, but Acteon resists, saying no, and tries to manage the pain himself. Lilliope cannot bring outside stabilizers in without escalating scrutiny, so she decides to act despite the danger. Lilliope explains that if they leave Acteon like this, mana could tear into his heart and cause an outburst, and that what he needs right now is a guide to stabilize him. She asks if there's a guide in the estate who can help, and his silence implies either none are available or none are trusted. That silence forces her to consider taking the risk of guiding without authorization. When Acteon indicates there is no available guide, Lilliope realizes she is the only guide present who can act. She notes the situation resembles the second awakening from the original timeline, and wonders if her presence has created a ripple effect that brought this danger to Brondern. She weighs the fatal canonical risk against the immediate necessity to stabilize him, and prepares to intervene. Lilliope flashes the canonical memory of her own death, while guiding, and recoils at the possibility of repeating history. She forces herself to ignore the vision when she sees Acteon's clear pain, and decides to intervene. She positions her hands to trace and untangle mana knots along his channels, while avoiding direct work on the heart so she can control intake. Acteon continues to clutch his chest, breath shallow and ragged. Lilliope accepts responsibility for prior impulsive choices and resolves to change the outcome this time. She remembers the professor's warnings about unauthorized mana use and guiding, and decides she will claim emergency justification if authorities investigate. With that resolve, she starts a controlled guidance sequence designed to be cautious, precise, and focused on stabilizing the immediate turbulence rather than overreaching. Lilliope grips Acteon's wrist and channels through her control stone bracelet while she maps the mana turbulence. Blue-white currents flow from her into his chest and along his channels as she centers him with his name. Acteon gasps and questions what she is doing, alarmed by the sensation, and she keeps her focus on tracing and loosening the emotional tangles that are woven into his mana rather than on raw arterial flow. Lilliope anchors Acteon's attention with a firm instruction to remember the moment, so he will hold focus while she works. The resonance fields brighten as partial synchronization occurs, and Acteon's expression clears a little when her guidance locks on to the instability source. The early stabilization shows progress and encourages Lilliope to proceed deeper into the tangle. Lilliope traces the channels and searches for the point where mana is twisted so she can unravel it. As she probes, she discovers that the flow is not pure mana, but contains another pattern woven through it. The recognition changes her plan from a simple stabilization to an emotional untangling, and she prepares to follow the irregular threads down the chest and spine channels toward the source. Lilliope perceives that the currents she is untying are Acteon's emotions embedded in mana rather than raw power. She identifies loneliness, isolation, cold emptiness, and fear winding through his channels, and then finds a fragile thread of remembered kindness tied to Aaron. Understanding this, she changes her approach and tunes her guiding to soothe those emotional tangles while loosening their hold on his mana. Acteon asks urgently what Lilliope is doing, and she replies that she is guiding and to please wait. He objects that he has never heard of emotions being synchronized during guiding, and that the method sounds foreign. Lilliope answers candidly that it is her first time too, and that she is improvising, then continues to calibrate dual channels to balance emotional mana against physiological risk. Lilliope works to unite the tangled currents, and concentrates them until a coherent sphere of balanced mana forms at Acteon's sternum. She breathes relief and thinks the tangle has been united. Expecting stabilization at this rate, instead a sudden surge from the heart appears as a sharp, red pulse, an unanticipated response that signals something deeper is happening with his core. Lilliope reels and gasps as she recognizes an alarming phenomenon. Acteon's heart appears to absorb her guiding ability directly, drawing the energy into his core rather than allowing it to stabilize normally. She wonders if this absorption is characteristic of an S-class Transcendent and tries to resist as the current reverses toward her control circuits. The absorption accelerates, and Acteon yells that Lilliope must remove her hand, frantically calling for a doctor and begging her not to die. Lilliope's strength collapses as her guiding circuits are drained, and she falls unconscious to the floor. Acteon panics and cradles her, shouting in alarm as the estate witnesses a crisis that may carry legal and mortal consequences. Morning light pours through a tall window onto a canopied bed where Lilliope Ordis lies unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Servants have moved her to a quieter room and placed a blanket over her, suggesting careful aftercare. Small details on the bedside table show someone has been tending her, and the house settles around the fragile calm. Lilliope groans and lifts her head, the movement slow and disoriented. Hyestin Ordis leans in immediately, relief tightening his voice as he asks if she is all right and presses a cup of water into her hand. She whispers that she feels like she might die, and he steadies her while urging her to drink and recover before worrying about anything else. Water steadies her, and Lilliope swallows it down as the door opens to reveal Acteon Brondern in a neat vest. He notes that she is awakened and studies her with a controlled concern, then criticizes her impulsiveness by comparing her to a mayfly. She coughs and rubs at her throat, annoyed by the reproach but aware his worry is real. Acteon tells her she knew it was dangerous to cut in and asks why she risked herself. Lilliope pushes back, asking what he would have done if she had not intervened and why he assumes she should ignore someone in peril when she can help. The exchange sharpens into practical arguments about duty and consequence, rather than soft apologies. Acteon almost excuses the attack on himself before stopping and admitting that without Hyestin and the immediate help, he would already be gone, which turns the conversation toward how close it came to killing him. Hyestin bristles and accuses Acteon of minimizing Lilliope's danger, and the two men exchange a cold tension that reveals how grave the prior episode truly was. Hyestin snaps that scolding is his business, and demands recognition for the risk taken, while Acteon meets him without backing down. Lilliope interrupts, deliberately shifting the energy, and asks for a simple, factual account of what happened while she was unconscious, so they can focus on practical next steps. Her request forces them to stop posturing and state the facts. Hyestin tries to smooth things over by saying there is nothing the patient needs to worry about, but Lilliope presses him for how the situation will be resolved, and remarks she should have woken in the administrative reading room. He rings for attendance and then tells her plainly that she was unconscious for 2 full days, which leaves her stunned as she checks the clock of her own body. The room falls quiet as staff bring light food and set it by her side, and Hyestin instructs her to eat first and worry later. A brief, almost playful scene shows both men fussing over Lilliope while she eats, and she watches them carefully, mentally reassessing their motives and the unusual cooperation between the two men. She wonders exactly what is unfolding while forcing herself to swallow the broth. From the doorway, she realizes they moved her into a much more prestigious room and notices how kindly the servants behave, which spurs a teasing remark about Hyestin suddenly becoming aristocratic. He flatly tells her to eat and take her medicine, forbidding leftovers, and the instruction carries the authority of someone who expects obedience. Lilliope complies, aware the favors come with strings. Acteon switches to a careful, respectful address and asks how she thinks he felt when she collapsed in front of him, a question that reads like guilt and relief mixed together. Lilliope answers plainly that he must have been worried about repercussions and consequences, then adds that, fortunately, things worked out and she is alive, which closes the emotional loop without melodrama. Acteon admits he acted on impulse and offers a terse apology, and Lilliope points out that gratitude would be more appropriate than scolding given the stakes. He concedes that she is right, and answers her with a respectful tone, acknowledging both her intervention and the debt she has effectively placed on him for saving his life. Hyestin presses for a real thank you and refuses to let the moment pass as mere politicking, while Acteon reports what the administration concluded, describing the incident as a special primary manifestation close to an abnormal magical reaction. He notes that the signs actually support a high predicted grade for Acteon, which adds a cold, clinical explanation beneath the personal drama. Acteon explains the mechanics and dangers of a first manifestation turning wrong, saying that a failure to accept magic power could cripple someone, or even send absorbed power flowing back and bursting the heart. Lilliope thinks through the stakes, realizing that if she had not intervened, the house would have suffered, and she herself would have faced relentless blame from the Duke, which sharpens why she cannot take this lightly. Acteon reaches across the blanket and takes her hand, telling her plainly that it is all thanks to her senior. The gesture is small but sincere, a physical acknowledgement of the debt she created by saving him, and Lilliope accepts the thanks with a quiet gravity that reframes their earlier argument into mutual responsibility. Acteon repeats that his life is owed to her and attempts a formal bow, which Hyestin finds insufficient and scolds him for not offering a simpler, proper greeting. Hyestin threatens to tell Acteon's father that the matter resolved, and then watches him leave with a stinging command not to return, while Acteon departs, careful and deferential toward Lilliope. The door closes, and Hyestin warns Lilliope with mock alarm not to get close to that fox, meaning Acteon, then orders her to finish eating, to take her medicine, and not to leave any leftovers. His tone mixes irritation and protectiveness as he steps out, leaving her to follow the recovery orders he takes seriously. Lilliope realizes she does not know what the second manifestation will bring, and she remembers that in the novel Millia manifested late, which makes the future less predictable. She pictures the half-year ahead when Millia may be unable to guide Acteon, and the memory of a dangerous scene with both of them trapped underlines the urgency of planning for other high-ranking guides to handle the next event. Knowing she cannot safely guide Acteon again because of his absorption anomaly, she decides to recruit other high-ranking guides and orchestrate their involvement during his second manifestation. Her plan is clear and practical, aimed at ensuring both Acteon and she survive the next event by passing the risk to qualified experts rather than shouldering it alone. An unease lingers despite the careful plans and the improved room, so Lilliope puts out a lamp and peers through the night window, watching the estate sleep. The quiet does not soothe her. Instead, it sharpens the sense that more must be done before the second manifestation arrives, and she lets the dark and the stars keep her company while she considers next steps. A polite knock interrupts her reading, and a voice asks if she may come in to check on her behalf of the Duke's wife. Lilliope invites the visitor, curious but composed, and a slim figure steps through the door with the ease of someone used to formal houses. The arrival promises a new connection into Brondern's inner support network. The visitor introduces himself as Beld and offers a friendly professionalism that immediately reads like medical staff. He stands framed by flowers and sunlight, the sort of person who blends meticulous care with polite confidence, and his presence signals that the house will provide medical oversight while she recovers. Beld repeats his greeting with calm amusement, and Lilliope rises to receive him because she cannot leave anyone standing. He remarks on her manners and she answers that she cannot let someone stand alone, which makes an immediate, gentle rapport between them and frames him as both courteous and slightly playful in his professional demeanor. Beld praises her politeness, and then abruptly asks whether she likes quizzes, a disarming way to probe her temperament. Lilliope is puzzled and answers that she does not, which makes him smile as if his little test confirms something useful about her. The exchange feels like a light diagnostic, him gauging how she reacts under unexpected questions. No content. When she registers his small evasions, he declares the quiz started and asks her a simple question about his role in the house, keeping her off balance in a friendly way. The tactic reveals his interest in assessing rather than interrogating, and Lilliope begins to play along while trying to deduce where he fits into the household hierarchy. He refuses to give a straight answer and instead compliments her hair and mentions he makes soap, a detail that seems trivial until she catalogues his well-kept clothing and precise manner. Those data points lead her to infer he is involved in manufacturing or medicinal refinement. Someone who cares about cleanliness and controlled processes rather than being a frontline physician. Lilliope deduces quickly that Beld is a pharmacist, which he receives with an amused question about whether he reeks of medicine. He explains that the attending physician is absent and that he came in the doctor's place, adding that if anything required a physician's license, he would obtain one rather than risk the patient. The clarity reassures her about the competence in the room. Beld hands over a small, faceted vial and says he carefully made a medicine to help Lilliope regain energy. She notes that a house with royal permissions can afford a dedicated pharmacist, and that this bottle is labeled as an improved Nexium, a refined form of mana medicine designed to reduce side effects. The identification increases her confidence in the treatment. A caption explains that during conflict, pharmacists and doctors are rare and valuable because they can refine Transcendent mana into Nexium, a pill form that aids recovery. Standard Nexium carries donor mana side effects, but the improved formulation mitigates those risks. The page shows labs and distressed patients to underline why an improved brew is so prized. The improved Nexium is presented as a perfected solution that solves the problems of ordinary Nexium, and text notes that only about 30 pharmacists in the kingdom can create this formulation. Seeing the blue liquid in her hand, Lilliope registers that the dose Beld made for her is indeed improved Nexium, a rare and valuable remedy that explains the house's access and careful treatment. She thinks of Beld as an extraordinary person with the skill to craft improved Nexium, and he gently advises more rest, noting that patients who ignore instructions tend to return worse. His tone mixes professional concern with dry humor, and the small joke about people who do not listen makes her smile despite the slow pace of recovery. Beld tells her he will return in 2 days to check on her and urges her not to cause trouble in the meantime. Once he leaves, she breathes easier and holds the improved Nexium vial, grateful that he departed without fuss. The room settles into quiet again, and she prepares to follow the medicine and rest that he prescribed. Lilliope drinks the improved Nexium and feels its coolness, but worry flares as she imagines rumors of blood spreading and what Hyestin might do if he heard it. She steels herself and resolves to recover rapidly and to recruit a high-ranking guide to replace Millia, reiterating that she does not want to have to guide Acteon again and will shift the risk to safer hands. A week passes and Lilliope finds that despite her determination, the recovery remains slow, a fact Bell remarks on during his daily morning checks. He watches her carefully and documents symptoms, maintaining a steady presence that underscores medical monitoring rather than dramatic cures, and she appreciates the routine even as impatience nags at her. Fed up with people fussing over her while she convalesces, Lilliope changes into daytime attire with a decisive stretch and declares the matter over. She tells herself she received confirmation from Beled that she may finally move about, and although he left many cautions, she accepts the permission and prepares to resume errands and duties with a cautious optimism. Beled had teased that she was probably the only patient pestering staff daily about permission to move, and she laughs at herself before stepping into her shoes and deciding to go out. The moment feels like reclaiming agency, a small but important step toward normal life after the near disaster. Hyestin arrives immediately and warns Acteon not to linger or try to slip into the house unnoticed, while Acteon replies that perhaps it would be better if he stepped in to help. The three stand in the ornate hall, and Lilliope notices with wry humor that her entourage has grown, which complicates the simple outing she had imagined. She allows Hyestin to accompany her, and then finds Acteon materializing as well, unbidden. The tiny, playful panels show both men insisting on joining, and when Acteon suggests postponing whatever she came to request for now, Lilliope internally compares herself to a Pied Piper who somehow attracts an entourage, just by stepping outside. Acteon mentions that Cassiel, his brother, is preparing to go out, and that the sibling is not in a good mood today. Lilliope notes that Cassiel will also be leaving the estate, which raises the possibility of an awkward encounter. Acteon confirms the detail, signaling a potential point of friction for the small group that will be leaving shortly. She resolves not to go out of her way to greet Cassiel if they cross paths, assuming he will be unfriendly toward her. From the window she watches a carriage and asks whether the person boarding is indeed Cassiel, then notes movements in the yard and plans her route to avoid a direct meeting while keeping the house's schedule in mind. As they prepare to leave, Acteon asks if she is ready, and Hyestin steps forward with a brisk command that it is time to go. He guides Lilliope toward the exit and takes charge of the immediate logistics, while Acteon lingers behind them, watching with a composed attention that makes it clear he intends to remain nearby despite Hyestin's protective stance. They move down the long hall toward the exit, and Hyestin finally asks why Acteon is following after being told not to return. Acteon simply smiles and says he has somewhere to go as well, but his easy answer masks the fact that he intends to stay close to Lilliope for reasons he will not yet confess. Acteon reports that the stable is unusually busy, and warns that sending separate parties will lengthen carriage preparation time. He suggests they go out together to save time, addressing Lilliope as senior, in a formal but practical tone. The proposal frames travel as a logistical problem rather than a social choice, and she considers the convenience. Lilliope flicks Acteon on the forehead and tells him he was being annoying, using a physical rebuke that cuts the formality. Hyestin steps in and takes her hand, saying they should leave now, and the trio moves out together while a blonde stranger, Prince Isidore, watches with a curious smile from a distance, noting the little domestic scene. Acteon watches them walk away, and remarks that what comes next will have to wait and see, a quiet admission that plans are still unfolding. He stands in the empty corridor for a moment, letting their departure carry the scene forward, before the page closes on him alone and thoughtful. At the bank's reception room, Prince Isidore greets Lilliope and mentions an unauthorized alert that reached the administration office recently. He says he came to fetch her from the bank to ask a few questions about the incident, and comments that the reception room is a pleasant spot for a talk, which turns the visit toward financial and administrative matters rather than gossip. She sips tea and mutters that her schedule has become chaotic, partly because Acteon unexpectedly joined the group earlier. She jokes that she only came to withdraw money, and suddenly a lord appeared, which is libelled here as Prince Isidore arrives and settles into the conversation. The mood is light, despite the administrative undertow. When Acteon and Hyestin split off for their own business, Lilliope feels a small relief that they will not be all clustered at once. At the table, Prince Isidore asks how she has fared under Brondern care, and she replies that thanks to his house she and her younger sibling have received generous treatment. The exchange stays polite and courteous as tea is poured. He asks about the incident and whether she performed unauthorized guiding during Acteon's first manifestation, phrased as an official inquiry. When she answers, he reassures her that she did nothing wrong and that there is no need to be timid, then brings up the matter of the reward money he mentioned earlier to confirm whether she came for that purpose. The tone is formal but warm. She acknowledges his question and he says his schedule is free, offering to follow her around as part of his duty to inspect subjects' lives. Lilliope is puzzled by why he would spend royal time accompanying her on errands, but accepts the company, aware that his attendance will make whatever she needs to do proceed with fewer obstacles. Isidore teases that she now has a fair bit of money and suggests she treat someone as a good use of it. proposing a restaurant opened by a chef who left the royal kitchens. Lilliope smiles and agrees to go, and the two stand up from the table with a practical plan to leave, the appointment shifting the conversation from duty back into a mundane, agreeable outing. Prince Isidore instructs Lilliope to get up and gently tells her he would prefer not to be called Your Highness so openly. She asks what she should call him, and he offers the more informal Isidore, Nim. He notices her hesitation and proposes they decide roles for the outing to keep appearances orderly, and then he steps toward the door so they can leave together. Isidore suggests they pretend to be a nobleman out with a common companion to hide his identity while they walk through the city. Lilliope blushes at the idea but agrees, saying she is in his hands for the day. They head toward the carriage, agreeing on the playful disguise and readying themselves to begin the city tour. Lilliope calls out and sees Hyestin and Acteon joining them later than expected. Isidore remarks that they are later than he thought, while the newcomers fall into step. She worries the expanded entourage will complicate things and asks if it will be a problem. Under her breath, she hopes the extra observers will not derail the plan. Isidore brushes off her concern with a light comment that the more the merrier. Lilliope forces a smile and steals a look at Hyestin and Acteon, feeling the weight of extra watchers. She worries silently about keeping the schedule on track with more people involved while Isidore strolls ahead, calm and unfazed by the shifting dynamics. They arrive in the bustling commercial district and pass the Royal Chef's restaurant where they had dined. Isidore remarks that the chef's skill is as good as ever while Hyestin and Acteon trail behind. Lilliope playfully asks if she was meant to pay the bill, and Isidore laughs it off as a tease, insisting he was only joking and keeping the mood light. As they move through the market lane, Lilliope asks if there is anything Isidore wants from her. He replies with a warm smile that there are many things he could want, and he compliments her cleverness. She answers carefully, aware there may be motives beneath the charm, and they continue down the street with a measured ease between them. Isidore's tone turns serious, as he asks whether high rank would really shield a manifester who acted without authorization, pressing a question about who bears responsibility. He then softens, saying he is relieved to look around the city and enjoy the day. Lilliope feels an uneasy knot in her chest, and thinks she has somehow become tangled in something more complicated than she expected. Lilliope watches Isidore carefully and notices a pattern. He teases and places small pressures that seem designed to sway her, then immediately withdraws when she grows suspicious. She realizes each friendly gesture is measured, intended to bring her closer without overt demands, and she catalogs that restraint as a deliberate strategy, rather than casual kindness. Lilliope wonders privately why Isidore is being so solicitous, and briefly considers whether his kindness is because she is Hyestin's only family. Hyestin returns with Acteon and jokes that Isidore is known as an airhead, a man-child of sorts. Acteon remains guarded, offering a silent warning that reputation and reality often differ. Acteon mentions the rumor that Isidore pays little attention to state matters and focuses only on his interests, but he quickly adds he doubts that simple characterization. Lilliope agrees that Isidore cannot be that frivolous, and asks for caution. Acteon promises to watch closely and try to discover the prince's true intentions while they continue toward the cathedral. Lilliope decides they should stop circling and simply get to the carriage bound for the Grand Cathedral. Acteon confirms the route and Hyestin nods, so the three prepare to depart. She takes one last look around to steady herself before they step toward the carriage and head out on the errand that brought them together. Acteon asks directly whether they are heading to the cathedral now and notes that his older brother went earlier, which could reduce the chance of an encounter. Lilliope accepts that answer and resolves to continue, though a thread of worry remains in her mind about running into someone they would rather avoid. Inside the Grand Cathedral, a lone figure stands beneath the stained glass, and Lilliope senses Cassiel's presence before she sees him. She hopes desperately they will not cross paths, knowing his rank and grief could complicate everything. The chapel's light cuts across the nave, while the possibility of confrontation hangs between them. They arrive at the Grand Cathedral, its white facade rising above the square. Lilliope pauses at the entrance and says it has been some time since they were last here. Hyestin and Acteon fall into step beside her as they pass through the gate and enter the chapel to tend to the memorials that brought them here. A narration notes the country's devotion to a god of love and peace, while pointing out the stark irony that manifestors are treated as the most efficient weapons. Despite that contradiction, the Grand Cathedral remains the capital's pride and most symbolic building, a place of public faith that also bears the weight of political power. Inside the cathedral, people offer prayers for family members leaving for war and gather for funerals when the fallen return. Nuns and clergy move quietly, and military honors accompany coffins. The chapel's function as both shrine and memorial anchors the siblings, visit, and gives weight to the quiet task they have come to perform. The nave fills with people remembering the lost, and Lilliope counts the number of sacrifices made in the Magic Crystal War as vividly obvious. She and Hyestin share the private knowledge that they lost their family to that conflict, and that memory steers them as they move through the chapel to the memorial stones they must tend. Lilliope recalls childhood in a small border city, and how the Magic Crystal War erupted over the forest crystals. A Transcendent's power tore through the town in an instant, leaving ruin in its wake. Only she and Hyestin survived among their family, and those memories of fleeing and loss shape every step of their lives now. After the war, they did whatever jobs they could to survive, until Lilliope's first manifestation allowed her to enter the military academy. Hyestin's gifts were noticed as well, and the pair received sponsorship from the Lorraine family. Eventually their parents' memorial stones were enshrined in the Grand Cathedral, tying them into official obligations and memory. Hyestin admits the cathedral does not feel pleasant to him, and Lilliope replies that the feeling depends on one's state of mind. She then turns her attention to Acteon, and hints that he seems to be scanning the area for Cathedral. Acteon confirms he is watching and stays alert, mindful of the brother who might still be nearby. Literal_desk. Lilliope notes Claire Brondern's memorial stone is housed here, which likely keeps Cathedral nearby. Acteon remembers Cathedral went out early and says they probably will not run into him, suggesting the chance of an encounter is low. To ease tension, he proposes they split briefly so each can move more freely and reduce the risk of another confrontation. Lilliope calls Acteon when Cathedral cuts in sharply and addresses Acteon as B rank, demanding to know why he is there. The sharpness in his voice draws every eye. Acteon replies carefully that he did not expect his brother to be present. The cathedral holds an awkward silence as the two brothers face one another, and Lilliope feels the tension spike. Cathedral tells them he did not expect to see them together, and derides Lilliope's companion as low class, implying Claire might be pleased in death. Acteon steps in to defend Lilliope, and insists his senior is not here because of Claire. The brothers trade barbs as Lilliope stands between them, unwilling to let the argument escalate further. Cathedral accuses Acteon of letting himself be softened by Lilliope's kindness. Acteon tightens his grip on his tie pin, and warns him that one day he will regret this deeply. The warning lands hard, and Cathedral, taken aback, asks what he means. Acteon's resolve does not waver, and the two brothers lock eyes over the unresolved grief between them. Lilliope recalls how hurtful misunderstandings can be and chooses to speak, saying there is nothing strange about a cadet coming to pray. Her words are measured and aimed at D, escalating the scene. Cathedral snaps in response, his hostility unsoftened, while Acteon stands ready to intervene if needed, and keeps careful watch over his brother's volatile mood. Isidore appears and tells Cathedral his words are a bit too harsh, and the prince points out that while Cathedral knows his own wounds, he may not see that others hurt as well. The intervention from royalty shifts the tenor of the confrontation, and Cathedral reacts with surprise at Isidore's unexpected presence and quiet admonition. Opening curly bracket, closing curly bracket, Isidore presses Cathedral, noting that the only reason he restrained himself was because the prince stood in a position of authority. He asks whether Cathedral would have listened if the speaker had been a mere B rank. Cathedral denies it, and Isidore turns the conversation to Lilliope, addressing her directly to let her explain why she has come to the cathedral. Isidore asks why Lilliope has come to the cathedral, and she answers plainly that she has come to clean her deceased parents' memorial stones. She admits quietly that this is the first time she and Hyestin have come here together. The simple confession carries the weight of years, and leaves her silently acknowledging how draining the whole situation has been. Still holding Hyestin's hand, Lilliope tells Cathedral that explaining every little thing wears her out, and then asks a direct moral question. Does his pain give him the right to hurt others? The question hangs in the air and shifts the exchange from accusation to accountability, forcing Cathedral to consider the implications of his grief-driven actions. Cathedral asks incredulously what Lilliope could possibly know, and she answers by pressing him with the raw facts of her past: eating a dead rat to survive, fleeing a collapsing city, losing family in the chaos. Her blunt recounting unsettles him, and forces Cathedral to grapple with a different kind of suffering that echoes the losses he claims to carry. Cathedral answers that he knows, and then recalls how he tried to live well so that his family could rest in peace. Scenes flash of him placing flowers and offering prayers at graves, a private discipline that contrasts with Lilliope's harsher survival. She listens as he explains that his sorrow shaped a different kind of response, one focused on honor and memory. Lilliope points out that everyone already accepts Cathedral's sorrow without demanding proof, and calls that acceptance a selfish luxury. Cathedral responds that he will return once he is finished, asking them not to take offense, and he steps away from the group. The brothers part with the tensions, unresolved but de-escalated for the moment. Lilliope thinks of canonical expectations, remembering how Millia's kindness once soothed Cathedral's wounds in the original tale. She accepts that she is not Millia, and that tender consolation is not the role she can or will play. She sets that boundary clearly in her mind, and refocuses on the practical tasks and responsibilities that matter most to her now. She declares quietly that her life has been too intense to afford kindness as a luxury she can give freely. Lilliope prioritizes survival and the concrete work of keeping Hyestin safe and preparing for the risks ahead, rather than assuming the role of emotional balm. With that resolve, she joins the others as they leave the chapel. Outside the cathedral, Hyestin suggests they visit again on their own, so the moment can be quieter. Lilliope asks when they might return, and then notices Cathedral lingering beside a carriage. She notes wryly that Isidore apparently left while she tended her parents, stones, and assumes they will meet the prince again later when schedules align. Outside the cathedral, Acteon and Cassiel face each other with thinly veiled hostility, until Cassiel surprisingly tells Lilliope to hop on his carriage. The offer catches her off guard and Hyestin reacts instinctively, ready to object. Acteon watches the interaction closely, wary of any further escalation or manipulation. Hyestin challenges Cassiel, asking who he is to tell Lilliope what to do, and reminding him of what just happened. Cassiel replies curtly that it is none of Hyestin's business. When Hyestin taunts that Cassiel might try to pass off his words as a slip, Cassiel coldly asks if there is anything more, testing how far the other will push. Hyestin lashes out verbally and Acteon steps between them, ordering him to stop. Acteon insists he cannot allow Cassiel and Lilliope to be alone together after the earlier disrespect shown in the Grand Cathedral. He sets a firm tone and signals that if Cassiel truly wishes to apologize, he must follow an orderly approach rather than escalating the argument further. Acteon tells Cassiel the correct approach is to ask for Lilliope's permission first. Cassiel, curious despite himself, looks toward Lilliope as she steps forward. Hyestin remains a protective presence at her side. The group holds its collective breath a moment as Lilliope prepares to answer whether she will accept the invitation. Cassiel wonders if Lilliope will simply walk away, but she opens the carriage door and tells him to move along. He admits he thought she would refuse. She warns him that if he stalls, he will only end up getting off the carriage again, and urges him to be decisive, pushing him gently into action rather than letting tension fester. Cassiel climbs into the carriage and answers simply that he will comply. Acteon and Hyestin watch from the street, both wary that Cassiel might blurt something inappropriate to Lilliope in a moment of grief. Acteon stands quiet and tense, parsing his brother's expression as the carriage curtains close around them for the short ride. As the carriage moves, Lilliope sits with her arms crossed and reflects on the strange negotiations that just transpired. She watches the light through the curtains and considers how little patience she has for performative grief, settling into a guarded calm as Cassiel's presence fills the enclosed space. Cassiel admits quietly that he's been using his past trauma as an excuse to avoid dealing with things and says Leah would have intervened if she had seen him in that state. Lilliope asks simply whether it is so hard to say sorry, and he offers an awkward but sincere apology for drawing conclusions and speaking harshly. She accepts the apology and the tension loosens a little. Instead of dwelling on the apology, Lilliope asks a pointed question. She wants to know what kind of person the one who died was. She clarifies she means Aaron, Claire's guide. Cassiel looks toward the memory of that guide as Lilliope waits, signaling that the next part of their conversation will focus on the past that still reverberates through present choices. A narration notes that Aaron's death still deeply affects Acteon's trauma, surfacing memories without warning. Acteon thinks that any hidden information about that time could be useful for handling a potential second manifestation. Cassiel, sitting nearby, acknowledges that her curiosity is understandable and that the story behind Aaron's death matters more than it first appears. Cassiel explains that Leah was exceptionally gifted, one of the few S-ranked individuals who awakened early. But after being sent to the battlefield at a young age, that bright child began to change. She became tormented by auditory and visual hallucinations, unable to sleep, and she spent her days wandering corridors in a state of worsening distress. He continues that because Leah wielded great power, she was thrust onto the front lines with little preparation. Even steadfast soldiers break under the pressure of combat, and Claire's fragile mental state buckled when exposed to death so directly. The narrative closes by acknowledging how monstrous the burden placed on S-ranked individuals can be. Cassiel observes that wielding monstrous power does not ensure a strong mind. Lilliope considers his words and begins to understand why Claire's guide could not stabilize her. The narration explains how when transcenders draw external magic into their hearts, their bodies and minds endure constant shock, a strain that even the most talented guides may struggle to manage. The narration explains that guides use their abilities to steady a transcender's body and mind, yet, in Claire's case post, traumatic stress overwhelmed those measures. Cassiel reflects that Claire must have desperately needed something to hold on to, some tiny glimmer of hope, and he implies that the lack of that anchor shaped everything that followed, while Lilliope listens closely to the painful detail. Lilliope remembers how Claire's guide failed, despite everyone hoping for a different outcome. She realizes Claire's death reads like a tragedy born from a world that refuses to recognize serious mental illness. Lilliope also notes that Cassiel may not even know how deeply Acteon's trauma still rings right now. Lilliope forces herself to apologize for judging Cassiel too quickly, and admits she cannot yet accept the idea that guiding would have saved Leah. She watches Cassiel and thinks aloud that if guiding truly worked, Leah should have lived. Cassiel looks on, and the unspoken gap between them widens. Cassiel recalls how Lilliope once pushed her only sibling into danger to attract patronage, and says it seemed like madness then. Lilliope remembers how desperate she felt to secure protection and sponsors for their cause. She also remembers Hyestin's small face and tells herself not to repeat that mistake without better safeguards. Lilliope thinks about how manifestors are boxed into roles once they become state-affiliated, and how Hyestin could be forced into a battlefield life. She decides it is safer to keep Hyestin where she can see him and to plan contingencies for Acteon's second manifestation. She imagines handing Acteon over to a reliable S-rank heroine if the worst comes to pass. Lilliope stops herself when the possibility hits that surviving a manifestation is not enough if guides and systems still fail. She realizes that if Acteon could die later in an accident or during occupation, just like Claire's guide, all her attempts to change fate would be for naught. That thought forces her to look for a more drastic, structural solution. Seeing the fragile interplay between guide and transcender makes Lilliope acknowledge that small fixes will not be enough. She concludes that a more drastic solution is required to keep Acteon safe. The realization unnerves her, but it crystallizes the scale of change she may have to push for. Lilliope briefly imagines revolution as a clear route to overturn the system that sends minors to the front lines. She knows that outright rebellion would be catastrophic, and is not sure she can lead such a thing. The thought returns her to the quieter, harder task of changing policy from inside when possible. The fantasy of uprisings lingers in Lilliope's mind, but she acknowledges she cannot simply be a rebel without a plan. She resolves to weigh survival against idealism, and to look for safer, tactical options that protect Hyestin and Acteon without destroying everything around them. Lilliope admits that she cannot launch a revolution on her own, and asks what practical measures remain. Cathedral apologizes again for his earlier anger and says sorry for being one-sided. Lilliope accepts the apology, deciding cooperation will be necessary even if they disagree on methods. Lilliope shrugs off the tension and says she tends to forget sharp words quickly, which lightens the mood. She registers Cathedral's quiet apology as progress, and decides not to press him further for now. The two settle into a careful truce that preserves their working relationship. Lilliope explains that, unless the law itself changes, the Academy will keep funneling state-affiliated cadets straight to the battlefield. She points to the parade of soldiers as proof that policy, not individual will, drives so many tragedies. The scale of the institutional problem makes clear why simple gestures cannot secure safety. Cathedral reluctantly accepts that the law ties their hands, and that consequences follow, regardless of personal intentions. Lilliope ironically applauds his recognition, and uses that moment to underline the urgency of structural change. Both understand that legal reform must be part of any real protection plan. Lilliope points out that blame aimed at guides misses the larger dynamics at play, and that the guide's death alongside the Transcender shows the system is failing on multiple levels. She presses Cathedral to look beyond easy targets and to consider the institutional causes that push S-ranked youth into collapse. Cathedral listens, forced to reconsider his assumptions. Lilliope runs through possible solutions, and wonders whether ending the Magic Stone War would solve everything. She acknowledges that even if the war ended, there is no guarantee another crisis would not erupt. The conversation returns them to the uncomfortable truth that the problem is systemic and recurring. Lilliope challenges Cathedral by naming the deeper injustice. High-ranking transcenders become tools for political gain and are pushed into harm for others' ambitions. She argues that the people who benefit from these casualties are the real problem, not the gifted youths forced into impossible roles. Cathedral hears the accusation and grows uneasy. Cathedral reacts with incredulity and calls the idea risky, but he also confesses the country has indeed lost its bearings. He cannot fully reject Lilliope's diagnosis because the evidence keeps pointing back to systemic exploitation. The exchange leaves both of them quieter and more determined. Lilliope pictures a worst case where Hyestin becomes an S-class cadet 6 months from now and is sent straight to the front for no reason other than rank. She vows to take Hyestin and flee the country if that becomes likely. Cathedral calls her plan extreme, and Lilliope insists she will not sit idle while the same tragedy repeats. Lilliope vows she will escape if anyone tries to harm Hyestin, and that she is prepared to risk everything to break the cycle that cost her family. She confesses that she has clawed her way this far with fierce determination, and will not allow complacency to undo it. The promise hangs between them like an oath. Lilliope challenges the idea of accepting a fate set by others, and asks whether following predetermined options is any better than fighting the system. Cathedral listens to that question and goes silent because he cannot yet answer. Lilliope presses him for a choice and waits for a commitment he has not yet given. Lilliope confirms that he will return in 6 months when the new semester begins, and that she will need him then. She dodges his question about her plans, saying she will know what to do when she gets back. Cathedral hears that, but senses she is keeping her true aims to herself. Cathedral tells Lilliope he will need her help when he returns, which surprises her because she assumed she was the only one making plans. She protests that the request does not mean he actually enjoys helping, but she accepts the practical alliance. The exchange cements their odd companionship. They arrive at the academy by carriage, and Lilliope notes their entrance with practiced composure. Cathedral disembarks in his usual distracted manner, while she smooths her posture and moves through the formalities. The ritual of arrival hides the urgency beneath their conversation. Cassiel insists he will keep Lilliope grounded when she begins to spiral, asking her to rely on him for practical support. She balks at the idea of needing babysitting but agrees to let him interrupt her if she starts to lose control. Their bickering conceals the real stress both of them carry about the coming ceremonies. Lilliope asks Cassiel to be calm and explains she will stop acting recklessly from now on. She steps away with a renewed sense of purpose and tells him she will avoid random gambits that could endanger Hyestin. Cassiel watches her leave, wordless and uncertain how to respond. 2 months pass and Lilliope reflects on the time since her talk with Cassiel. She returns to the academy with a quiet, steady purpose, and uses those weeks to pursue every lead that might prevent another tragedy. Time has moved for everyone else, but her urgency has only deepened. Cassiel has been careful around Lilliope, keeping conversations light and watching her mood. Lilliope admits she has been giving him the cold shoulder, while still appreciating his steadiness. She spends long hours searching records in corridors, frustrated that she still cannot find a crucial missing piece. Lilliope wakes from the mounting frustration to realize she has been searching for Millia Ernst for 2 months with no success. The absence of the canonical heroine gnaws at her because Millia's presence could change everything. Lilliope's anxiety reaches a breaking point as she vows not to stop until she finds the girl. Freshmen stream into the academy, and the halls hum with the nervous energy of new faces. Lilliope moves through the crowd, eyes scanning for the girl she has yet to locate. Every unfamiliar student is another reminder that Millia's disappearance is both strange and dangerous. Lilliope returns again to the memory that in the original novel, she died on the day of the entrance. That image motivates her search even more, because she cannot accept that history repeating itself is inevitable. She has spent countless hours looking for Millia and refuses to give up now. A brief conversation with fellow students yields nothing concrete, and a misremembered name leaves Lilliope annoyed, but no closer to Millia. She remembers that Acteon's second manifestation will begin after the entrance ceremony ends, which compresses the time she has left. The pressure to find a guide for that crisis tightens. Lilliope admits she cannot manage Acteon alone, and has spent 2 days compiling a list of high-ranking guides at the academy. She realizes the most talented cadets are already deployed, which narrows her realistic options. The margins of safety have closed, and she must act quickly. Lilliope briefly contemplates abandoning everything, but she rejects that because it would leave Hyestin vulnerable. She asks whether there is any other way for one of them to avoid death, and finds no clean answers. Cassiel offers help and medicine, and she refuses because her problem is not physical but structural and urgent. Cassiel presses Lilliope for details, and she tells him some truths are better left unsaid for now. She asks 2 cadets to handle the entrance ceremony on their own, while she completes necessary paperwork and follows up on leads. The practical delegation is meant to free her to chase the one thing nobody else seems to be looking for. One cadet misinterprets Lilliope's plans as a longer absence, but she clarifies she will return before long and stick to her objective. Cassiel shuffles awkwardly and asks if he can see her afterward, which startles her because he rarely makes such requests. She promises to consider it, then focuses on the business at hand. Lilliope admits she worries that Acteon's second manifestation could begin during the entrance ceremony, and she decides to check the garden status no matter how inconvenient. Cassiel volunteers to be on call, and the cadets promise to cover the ceremony. Lilliope leaves them with a curt acceptance she means to keep. The younger cadets bicker playfully, which gives Lilliope a brief moment of levity as she watches them go. She and Cassiel move through the academy together, their steps quick but controlled. Lilliope admits the day feels odd, a thin sign that the stakes are about to shift. Cassiel allows a moment of nostalgia about the academy, but Lilliope keeps them moving because she has no time for sentiment. She urges him to finish the administrative details and stay focused on the practical steps ahead. The corridor swallows them as they prepare to separate briefly so she can continue her search. They climb toward the main hall, and Lilliope keeps her responses short to conserve energy for the work ahead. Cassiel falls into step with her, both of them complicit in the unspoken plan. The chapter moves on, and Lilliope redirects her attention to the most urgent lead she still lacks. Lilliope leaves behind the administrative bustle with a curt farewell and tells herself to stop by the dorms on the way to the entrance ceremony. She reminds herself that Millia Ernst is a new student this year, which sharpens her urgency because Millia's absence is both unusual and dangerous. Lilliope steels herself to search more persistently. Lilliope traces rumors and sightings and sees signs Millia may have been avoiding the administration office. She imagines the worst if Millia truly ran away, because her life could be endangered outside the academy's protections. The stakes crystallize into one urgent fact. The rank guide they most need might be at risk now. Lilliope considers that even if Millia remains hidden, the administration could impose harsh restrictions that damage her well-being. She recalls how in the novel, multiple guides barely managed to stabilize Acteon during his crisis, because the situation spiraled out of control. That memory doubles the urgency of finding a reliable safety solution now. Lilliope remembers that Millia's first manifestation coincided with a terrorist attack, a chaotic event that caused Acteon's mana circuit to twist and nearly kill them both. She realizes why locating Millia would have been easier had she known which rank guide to search for earlier. That failure to identify the right person cost her precious time. Images of that earlier crisis return, and Lilliope feels nauseous at the thought of a repeat event. She recognizes that Millia's late manifestation in the past and the terror attack explain why the situation got so out of control. The memory convinces her that in the current crisis locating Millia quickly is essential. Lilliope briefly worries that if she uses authority to track Millia, she will become like the official she despises, but she pushes that aside because the risk is too great. She steels herself, breathes through the unease, and forces her feet forward, toward the dormitory wing. Then she spots someone and freezes at the sudden recognition. Lilliope finally finds Millia face to face in the dormitory and greets her in a composed voice. Millia stammers in surprise because she had been hiding and thought no one would find her. Lilliope masks the relief she feels and pretends it was nothing as she invites the girl into the conversation. Millia rushes to tell Lilliope that the Garden of Vows C control stone is malfunctioning and may not activate properly. Lilliope hears the phrase control stone and understands immediately why this matters, because the garden is the Academy's prepared space for abnormal manifestations. The revelation turns a theoretical worry into an immediate operational crisis. Millia explains she was told to report that the C control stone in the garden is not activating reliably, and she did not know who to contact. Lilliope's mind races because the garden is explicitly designed to prepare and stabilize abnormal manifestations. She realizes that a mechanical failure there would explain how an S-ranked casualty could occur in the first place. Lilliope's shock turns to hope when she realizes that if the garden's control stone activates normally, Acteon's circuit could be stabilized and survival becomes possible. The discovery reframes Claire's death as a maintenance and logistics failure rather than unstoppable fate. Lilliope resolves to act quickly because this is the clearest path to keeping Acteon safe. Lily reviews the logic she has just pieced together. The garden was built to manage abnormal manifestations, and a malfunction there would explain earlier tragedies. She realizes she overlooked this because she had been consumed by the idea that death was fated. Now she sees a practical lever she can pull and prepares to push it. Millia asks if Lilliope will attend the entrance ceremony, and Lilliope answers that the freshmen should go to the Cathedral Hall while she checks the garden immediately. She says there is no time to waste and runs toward the research facility. Lilliope's stride is urgent because she now understands that replacing or repairing the control stone could change everything. Millia stands frozen in the hallway, silence filling the space as she processes what just happened. The chapter title interrupts the pause, then researcher Ortis appears in the distance with a clipboard, heading toward the cathedral hall with purposeful steps. Ortis turns at the sound of hurried footsteps, and is addressed as Cadet Ortis. Asked why she is here, the cadet catches her breath, and demands whether the control stones in the garden are activating normally, forcing the researcher to look up and answer the sudden alarm. The cadet says she felt a strange mana reaction coming from the direction of the Grand Cathedral Hall, and describes it as different from any second manifestation she has felt before. Ortis asks incredulously how she could detect such a reaction from that distance, and points out that a detection like that would imply an S rank, which a B rank cadet should not perceive. The cadet presses the possibility that an abnormal second manifestation might already be occurring. Ortis scoffs at the idea but hears the urgency behind the claim and asks whether the cadet can accept responsibility for what comes next. The question lands heavily as the corridor hums with unseen energy. Ortis asks if the cadet is threatening him, then listens as she identifies Acteon Brondern as the one showing these new signs. She explains she stood in front of him during his first manifestation and confirms the boy's estimated rank, making clear why this situation demands immediate action. Ortis exclaims at the implication of an S-rank second manifestation, and then admits the control stones were nearly depleted from a prior A-rank second manifestation 2 days ago. He reports that replacement work has only just begun and that the spares are not ready, which makes the cadet reel as she realizes that proper replacements might have prevented the earlier casualty. The cadet calculates that if the control stone's mana is stable, she might survive this second manifestation. Ortis says replacement work is underway, and they do have spare control stones, so a direct request to the workers could speed things up. The cadet volunteers to fetch the person who can authorize the move and rushes out while Ortis calls her name in concern. Before leaving, the cadet warns Ortis that he will be held responsible for every word if anything goes wrong, and offers herself as a test subject if needed. She adds that if nothing happens, he can consign her to the stockade, but if the garden stabilizes, things will prove different. With that, she bolts down the hall. As she runs, the cadet thinks that when she first remembered the novel's contents, she planned to push Acteon's guiding role onto someone else to keep her own goals intact. Now that events force her hand, she is the one stepping up, and she presses on toward the garden without hesitation. The cadet contemplates that she is not truly afraid of dying and can accept fate, but she cannot accept leaving her younger brother Hyestin unprotected. The thought of his welfare pushes her forward and steels her resolve to act, rather than resign herself to whatever the story dictated. She briefly considers reaching out to Prince Isidore, but cuts the idle thought off and refocuses on the immediate task. The cadet tells herself to keep thinking until the second manifestation and moves with the crowd toward the ceremony, mind already running through contingencies. She wonders if there is anything she missed, besides the control stones, and notes that Acteon tends to be defensive and guarded, never relying on others lightly. The narration explains that for someone so sensitive, a sudden second manifestation at the entrance ceremony would likely have been sensed by the student first, which could explain why signs appeared so early. Acteon sits among the new students, and the cadet resolves that if she spots any unusual signs, she will pull him out immediately. She notes his earlier odd behavior and that he seemed more worried than she expected, so she keeps a close lookout while the ceremony begins, and the new students file into the hall. A sudden rush of unfamiliar mana catches the cadet's attention, and she questions whether it is natural mana. The energy feels sharp and different, and she strains to understand its origin as it coils through the air above the gathered students. Someone calls out for Acteon, but the distance makes it hard to locate him clearly. The cadet lunges forward, telling the nearby guide Ordis to stay back, and Brondern steps in beside her, taking control of the situation as the boy begins to show signs of distress. Cassiel warns that there are countermeasures for a second manifestation, and that this is a matter for higher-ranking guides, noting that the manifestation will mirror the subject's mental state, and an inexperienced guide cannot handle it. The cadet insists she remembers handling similar danger in the original story, and refuses to stand aside. As purple motes drift past, Acton quietly tells his senior not to come, refusing intervention. The cadet watches him bow and tries to respect his boundaries even as the danger around them thickens. A brutal surge of energy rolls through the hall, and several students collapse as mana lashes out. Professors shout that it could be a second manifestation, while the cadet remembers that Acteon fell right before her and told her not to come, which translates to a wrenching mix of disbelief and urgency. Lilliope orders that Acteon be moved to the Garden of Vows immediately, and the nearby professors respond by lifting him and carrying him toward the access corridor. One of the professors confirms they are seeing a second manifestation and notes the unusual crystallized violet energy beginning to seep from the student as they hurry him away for containment. The professors say they will examine Acteon more closely later, but that guiding him now is the priority and they must move quickly. Lilliope follows at a measured distance to assess the situation, while Cassiel falls in beside her and places a tentative hand on her shoulder as the group carries the collapsing student through the corridor. Lilliope encounters guide cadet Heath and asks whether he will follow the team into the garden. He answers that Acteon has been acting strangely since morning, and that he first thought the boy was simply unusually nervous, which only adds to the sense that something deeper is happening as they join the procession to the garden access. Heath jogs to keep pace with Lilliope as she thinks that she was the first to notice. Acteon was unwell, but chose not to escalate the matter earlier to avoid alarm. A robed class guide arrives on the scene, and a professor quickly identifies the collapsed student and directs their rescue to the Garden of Vows. An A-class professor bends to check his control stone bracelet, while Lilliope shouts for the rescuers to stop checking and to get the student to the garden immediately. Suddenly, the professor notices a crack in his bracelet as violet fractures run across the metal, signaling that even the equipment meant to suppress the surge is failing. The professor's control stone bracelet shatters with a burst of purple energy, and he screams for everyone to evacuate immediately. The shockwave sends a colleague tumbling, and students scatter as crystallized energy spirals through the corridor, forcing an abrupt and dangerous retreat. Professors shout for everyone to run before they get caught in the energy surge, while Lilliope braces against the purple drafts scraping the walls. She forces herself to stay focused and thinks if she can maintain concentration, she might survive the violent spike in crystallized mana. Lilliope reaches instinctively toward the collapsing student, thinking guiding might still be possible now, but Cassiel grabs her and drags her back, warning that she will die if swept up in the surge. The floor trembles as energy density spikes, and they are both thrown off balance. She insists she has a way, and fights Cassiel's restraining grip, but a sudden chop to her awareness knocks her toward unconsciousness. Cassiel catches her and calls her name as students pull away, and crystalline eruptions continue to burst through the corridor, forcing the team to prioritize safety. Cassiel stands amid the swirling storm of crystallized mana and mutters that the student will die if they do not act. The scene cuts to black as the immediate crisis stretches every resource thin. Lilliope comes to in the plaza outside the auditorium, gasping and rubbing her neck as she wonders if Cassiel knocked her unconscious. The sunset hangs low while distant alarms and activity ripple from the Garden of Vows. Cassiel asks the cadet how things are progressing, and she scans the plaza, noting professors and upper-class guide cadets are forming response teams. She wonders why the headmaster called out cadets rather than relying solely on professors, but recognizes that available guides on campus are limited. A coordinating professor reports they have contained the new student in the Garden of Vows for now, but warns there is no S-rank guide available to lead containment. Lilliope snaps that she ordered control stones scattered across the floor, and asks why replacements are not complete, and then a staffer rushes in shouting that they have lost contact with the team. Inside the garden, an aide reports they can no longer detect Professor Hessian's energy, and a cadet stammers that even an A-class guide lost their magic. Lilliope grimly infers he is dead from energy overload, and asks what they should do since no better guide is available right now, the question hanging against the garden's failing equipment. Freshman guides whisper nervously about dorm assignments, while Lilliope runs the grim calculus aloud. The headmaster called cadets so they can overwhelm Acteon's energy through sheer numbers until higher-ranked guides arrive. She accepts the cold reality that additional casualties are considered inevitable, given the nature of his energy crystallization. She pictures crystallized energy raging like a storm, and knows that if it is not stopped, not just the academy, but the whole area will be destroyed. Because the Garden of Vows is not functioning properly, Lilliope decides guiding seems the best option for now, and moves to join the effort despite the cost. She tells Cassiel she will speak to the professor first, and he grabs her wrist, asking what she plans to do. She asks about Hyestin, and he reports that first-stage manifestors were moved to the annex as useless in containment, which makes her exhale and pivot toward the command staff to take action. Cassiel urges her to stay put, arguing that sneaking a single person out is easy, and that risking more is needless. Lilliope refuses to be counseled into inaction, and snaps at him to stop being stubborn, which leaves him silent and conflicted as she steels herself to push forward. Cassiel presses that a professor already died, and asks what she plans to do, warning that going in would be throwing her life away. Lilliope replies that she has guided Acteon before, and he counters that a second manifestation is a different beast, and her rank gap with Acteon makes any contact extremely dangerous if anything goes wrong. Lilliope admits she expects to be torn apart by his energy, but she points out that she is still more capable than someone with no experience. She insists she does not want to die either, and bristles when others act as if she were already dead, which only spurs her determination to press the issue with command staff. Cassiel exhales and warns that if she does not return in one piece, he will do as he pleases in her absence, a thin threat that reveals how much he cares. Lilliope answers that she will come back more intact than ever, and heads off to talk to the professor while he watches her go, worry visible in his posture. She reviews the prior success in her head, and reasons that if guiding Acteon had been possible once because of a strong resonance between them, there is a chance it could work again now. With that slim hope, she walks toward the garden team to offer herself as a guide. A quick, embarrassed memory plays out, as Cassiel carries an unconscious Lilliope and fusses because she had unbuttoned her vest, worrying the evening air will chill her. An announcement calls all guides to the plaza in front of the auditorium, and he covers her with a spare uniform jacket, which she immediately complains about as they hurry off to muster the response. At dusk, 2 onlookers watch the cathedral from a window, and remark that such emergencies are apparently normal at military academies. Noting how interesting it all seems, they remain unnamed observers as the crisis unfolds below. Inside the annex, freshmen worry about trivial matters like dorm assignments, while senior cadets murmur about worst-case scenarios, including the possibility the entire academy could be destroyed. Millia sits by a window and, feeling the weight of the decision to call cadets into danger, wonders whether it was truly the right choice as she tightens her grip on her sleeves. Lilliope runs toward the garden wing with full purpose, while Millia, perched in the hall, rises and starts to track her direction. Millia thinks that forcing someone to risk their life is terrible, but this time the circumstances feel different and the urgency compels movement. Millia reflects that the first Lilliope she knew had always been gentle, but the second Lilliope she met now is struggling with decisions about both her and Millia. She understands the burden the senior carries and recognizes it is born of choices neither can fully escape. Millia admits she and Lilliope both share knowledge of the worst possible future, but she owns a painful difference. Her senior never sent her to die, and yet Millia was the one who pushed her into danger. She watches Lilliope approach the garden entrance, while violet motes climb the air. Unable to intervene directly, Millia tells herself that if Lilliope is senior, she can handle it, but she finds it strange that the Garden of Vows is not functioning properly right now. She reminds herself she prepared many things to help, yet at the end of the day she is tormented by the fact that she was the one who pushed her senior into danger, and that thought makes her hands tremble. Millia senses another tremble, and looks up to find Hyestin standing before her. He kneels and tells her that nothing bad will happen, and that she should calm down because worrying will only make others more anxious. He sits beside her and offers a steadying presence as she tries to breathe through the fear. Millia accepts Hyestin's attempt to soothe her and says that nothing bad will happen while she watches him offer a steady presence. She remembers the man who collapsed after losing his only family and thinks about the fury that man held toward Acteon. The memory and the present fold together as she keeps looking toward the garden with a troubled focus. Millia recalls that Hyestin once looked at her with disgust, and now watches him endure pain while worrying about others. He notices her staring, asks why she is looking at him like that, and she admits he reminded her of someone from the past. They sit against the wall and wait, the quiet shared between them. Hyestin keeps watch down the corridor, while Millia wonders how much he will hate her for what she helped cause. She catches herself and admits that what frightens her more is what lies ahead in the garden, and her gaze drifts back to the path Lilliope took. Millia silently prays that no one will be hurt as the image of a man losing himself returns to her mind. She asks for protection and hopes for safety for everyone involved. Hyestin closes his eyes with his jaw set and offers steady silence as she finishes the plea. Hyestin replies softly to Millia, and the scene moves outside where Lilliope stands before the assembled team. She confirms that everyone is present and calls for one last review before they enter the Garden of Vows as daylight fades, preparing them for what is coming. Lilliope explains that the headmaster and professors have reclassified Acteon's second manifestation as a rampager and contacted the Awakened Oversight Bureau while they deploy cadets to buy time. She identifies the two deployees and explains that they lack combat experience but possess a high level of stabilization knowledge, which is why they are being sent. Opening curly bracket, closing curly bracket. A supervising professor warns that once they enter the Garden of Vows, no external support. Mary will reach them and reminds them of the risk. Lilliope and the cadets acknowledge the restriction and step forward toward the entry hall as containment motes swirl around the threshold. Lilliope leads the two cadets across the garden gate as violet motes rise and the containment field struggles to hold. The three move together into the space, alert to the unstable magic that concentrates around the entrance. Inside the outer chamber, Lilliope freezes at the sight of an enormous concentration of energy and asks if this is all Acteon's power. She notes that the energy density is overwhelming and thinks it feels like her lungs will collapse, then identifies the Garden of Vows entrance at the core and signals the group to advance with caution. At the inner door, the blue-haired senior offers to go first and Lilliope objects, but the senior steps in regardless and sweeps the chamber for immediate danger. After a careful scan, she signals that it is all clear, and the red-haired cadet and Lilliope follow her into the interior. A sudden voice echoes from the core, and a violent rejection pulse explodes outward. The pulse slams the blue-haired senior across the chamber, and crystallized shards begin to rain through the room. Lilliope skids on the floor and raises her arms to guard her face from the flying fragments. Lilliope rushes to the injured senior and asks if she is okay. The senior groans that her left wrist and legs are bruised, and that her rib might be sore, then tries to sit up. Lilliope curses under her breath while she tracks another surge of Acteon's aura rising near the core. The red-haired cadet steels himself and says he will go in while asking someone to check for other injuries, but he breaks down and flees before he can proceed. Lilliope shouts after him that she understands his fear, but he cannot abandon the injured, and she turns back to stabilize the senior herself. The blue-haired senior warns that Acteon attacked the moment he saw her, and that his behavior looked like he was pushing everyone away to keep them out. Lilliope understands that isolating him is dangerous, but also that doing nothing will lead to death for the whole group. The senior asks if Lilliope will be alright alone as they regroup. The senior says the pain is bad, but there is no bleeding, and asks if Lilliope is going in. Lilliope answers that they need a way to get out, and promises she will be back, then strides forward alone as the violet motifs of the field thicken around her. Standing at the core gate, Lilliope resolves that she must handle the situation. She peers through the red-lit opening, tells Acteon not to push her away, and steps inside, where his silhouette tenses amid the turbulent mana. The sealed core door flashes red repeatedly as the Garden of Vows containment strains under Acteon's surging energy, the metal and stones shivering with each pulse. Within the core zone, Lilliope observes that enough mana has been drawn into this place to cover half the Academy crowns, and that there is probably no residual mana left elsewhere. She thinks of the chamber as a powder keg ready to blow, and then narrows her eyes as a shape flickers inside the aura. Lilliope recognizes Professor Hyestin's suspended corpse amid fractured crystal formations and realizes he entered before them to guide Acteon and failed. The outcome should have been expected, but the sight still chills her, and she steels herself to press on so she does not meet the same fate. The silence of the inner chamber makes Lilliope uneasy, and she calls Acteon's name. She finds him upright and breathing hard with shaking hands and judges that he is not in a full rampage state. She dashes across the crystalline floor to reach him and attempt guiding contact. Lilliope assesses that Acteon is unconscious but not in critical condition and decides that this might be the only chance to proceed with guiding and stabilize him. She calls his name and her resonance begins to activate, pulling memories and emotions into the chamber as overlay projections start to appear. A memory overlays the chamber, and Lilliope realizes she is seeing Acteon's recollections and emotions again. In that memory, Brondern tells a young Acteon that she gives advice because he looks like he might manifest the same way she did, and warns him not to trust the guide, insisting that monsters like them will only end up dead. Lilliope identifies the woman as Claire. Claire apologizes for taking Aaron and tells Acteon not to forget her words, and then she kills herself with a gun. The memory snaps like a wound opening, and Lilliope's eyes widen as the projection ends, and the truth of that trauma settles over the chamber. Claire's final declaration that they are monsters reverberates through the projection, and Lilliope gasps as violet shards spin faster around Acteon. The trauma in the memory feeds the rejection pulse that ripples through the room. Lilliope finally understands that Acteon's violent rejection pulse was not a random outburst, but a trauma projection tied to Claire's death. The memory reveals why his energy reacts the way it does when he experiences memories of her. Lilliope realizes that because of Claire's words, Acteon believes the same fate will befall him, and she refuses to let that branding define him. She steps closer and reaches his shoulder, demanding that he get a hold of himself while trying to pull his attention back to the present. Acteon's energy spikes into jagged crystalline formations under his feet, and Lilliope reacts with disbelief at the onset of a mana rampage. She notes that if she remains passive, she could end up like Professor Hyestin, and quickly adjusts her footing to time any intervention precisely. She forces herself to get a grip, and repeats that she must bring Acteon back to normal, and not be afraid. Lilliope reasons that he must have taken a mental hit while channeling mana unconsciously and prepares to approach through a lull in the projectiles to attempt stabilization. Lilliope reasons that if she can use guiding to stabilize the heart circuits that draw in mana, Acteon can regain control over his flow. She steps across the unstable platform toward him as violet arcs crackle and shards hover between them. A crystallized shard cuts Lilliope's arm and she curses at the sudden pain, while noticing that Acteon is starting to react to her movements. She understands that whether she retreats or advances, he will register motion and likely counter with an attack, but she keeps moving forward. Less than / greater than. Lilliope calculates that the present moment is the last chance to escape, while his reaction is slowest. But she refuses to run. She calls for any sign if Acteon can hear her and waits for a response, but he remains unresponsive as the violet aura around him flares. She decides she cannot leave Acteon like this and sprints in, reaching for him. He reflexively grabs her as they collide in the vortex, and the pressure of his uncontrolled mana crushes her shoulder while he holds on, still half outside of himself. Enduring the crushing grip, Lilliope drags Acteon's gaze toward her and yells for him to snap out of it. Violent energy surges, threaten to throw her from his grasp, but she keeps contact and forces his attention into the present. Acteon groans and his eyes remain unfocused, and Lilliope thinks with mounting alarm that he still has not come back to his senses. She tightens her hold and prepares to attempt an extreme stabilization method to force a reset in his heart and channel circuits. Lilliope tells him that if he kills her, she will never forgive him, and that Hyestin will be left alone, a hatred that would only break him further. She shakes him and demands that he realize she is standing right in front of him and to snap out of the projection. When Acteon gives no clear reaction, Lilliope concludes the only remaining option is the forced resonance method used before and prepares to synchronize him by force. She lightens the moment with a private warning about taking responsibility for a future kiss, then rises onto her toes and closes the small gap between them so she can begin. Lilliope forces a synchronized contact by kissing Acteon to anchor his heart circuits to hers. Blue stabilization currents flood the chamber and begin to overtake the violent violet field, deepening resonance between them as memory and emotion flow through the link. Shared vision sparks once more, and Lilliope notes that she is again seeing Acteon's memories and emotions just like during his first manifestation. The projection builds a rain-soaked memory landscape that overlays the chamber and draws her into his past. In the memory, a young Acteon waits outside and a brown-haired servant woman hurriedly asks why he is standing there, suggesting he might be waiting because his mother is returning from the battlefield. She judges that the mother must have just come back, grabs the boy and says he has to hide quickly. They crouch in the bushes until a noble voice approaches and calls the boy clever, and then Duke Brondern steps into view with soldiers fanning out behind him. The woman shields Acteon instinctively as the Duke smiles in a way that makes the memory turn harsh. Night soldiers line the clearing while Duke Brondern approaches, and the memory focuses on his advance. Lilliope watches the projection and recognizes him by sight as the negotiation and confrontation begin to unfold in the boy's past. Duke Glock tells the woman that His Majesty has given permission and that she will receive no more orders from her current command, then adds that he has arranged for her, as military property, to be legally transferred into his possession. Young Acteon peeks wide-eyed from behind the woman's arm as the bargain is declared. The Duke remarks that there was friction about the transfer, and the boy's face twists with anger. Acteon charges toward him, shouting, but the Duke's men intercept the child and the woman twists her body in a desperate attempt to protect him as the memory unfolds. Duke Glock calls the confrontation a hassle and throws a subordinate aside as he subdues the boy. The woman screams for Acteon to let go of her, while Lilliope watches the rain-soaked scene and wonders why the boy is revealing this brutal memory now. The memory shifts to the Brondern estate, where the brown-haired woman lies, chained and groaning in a dim salon. The scrape of the cuff on the floor underscores the captivity, and Lilliope whispers that the image is too much to bear as she sees what imprisonment meant for those taken here. A servant in the memory announces that visitation time is over, and asks visitors to leave while young Acteon sits alone on a chair, ignored. Lilliope watches the routine and concludes that the estate treats him like an object to be observed, not a child to be cared for, and that no one speaks to or tends him. The memory moves to a quieter space where a red-haired man approaches with a warm smile. He introduces himself as Aaron and sits near Acteon with a book, initiating a gentle conversation that offers the boy a rare, calm presence. Lilliope identifies the man as Claire's guide. Aaron tells the household he will be staying at the estate, and Claire arrives to warn the staff that he is her guide and to treat that relationship with care. Acteon accepts Claire's warning at first and keeps his distance, but over time the memory shows the boy gradually opening his heart to Aaron, despite the barrier she tried to maintain. The final memory shows Aaron supporting Acteon as they walk through the estate, and the projection closes on that small kindness. Lilliope absorbs the core wound behind Acteon's projections and understands that Aaron was the one who treated the boy as if he were truly loved. Lilliope follows the memory of Aaron and the boy walking side by side, and she registers the small kindnesses Aaron gives without fuss. She understands how rare that calm presence was for Acteon, how the household treated him like a thing to be observed, while Aaron treated him like a child who mattered. The memory closes on that quiet tenderness, and Lilliope wishes she did not already know how this past would end. The memory narrows on a confession meant to cut straight to the wound, and Lilliope realizes why this scene was shown. The projection makes plain that the real purpose is to force the fear into the light, to show that Acteon has been carrying an unbearable belief about what guides suffer and why those memories haunt him. Seeing it this way makes the fear unmistakable rather than abstract. The memory names the killer and then points the name at Acteon, and Lilliope feels the core idea settle into place. Guides always vanish, and the thing that takes them is called the Transcendent. The accusation lands on Acteon as if to say the monster includes him, and that sharp, accusing logic explains why he has kept everyone at arm's length. The projection names the fear without mercy, telling Acteon that he is afraid of himself, afraid he might kill his guides, and reminding him that he already hurt a guide once. Lilliope accepts what the memory shows, that his rejections and distance were born of guilt and terror, and that this is why he shoved people away even when kindness finally reached him. Lilliope decides she will not step back from the danger the way Acteon expected, and she closes on him to force a different truth. She uses a high-resonance contact, pressing herself to him to override the repulsion field and stabilize his S-rank energy, and the contact sends energy crystallization spreading outward, where crystals form and begin to fall. She tells him through the act itself not to push her away, because saving him must come before whatever rules others expect them to follow. The light continues to bloom, and Lilliope lets her guard drop enough to listen to the change in his mana, noting quietly that his energy is calming. She allows herself a moment to breathe because the resonance she forced has done its work for now, and she concentrates on holding him safely until the crystallization finishes its slow unspooling. Acteon comes to bewildered and weak, not yet steady on his feet, and she supports his head and shoulder as he registers what has happened. He tries to speak and to move, but she keeps him close until the dizziness fades, making sure he does not bolt from the vulnerability he has just survived. Sudden reality hits her that this was more than a routine guide action, and she pulls back as if the intimacy itself startled her. She lets herself collapse in a show of exhaustion to hide the deeper tremor beneath the surface, then looks up at Acteon with one careful, teasing word to keep the scene from becoming too raw for either of them. Acteon is flustered and awkward in the aftermath, stumbling over how to help her steady herself, and she plays the moment down by asking him to stand and assist. He obeys, clumsy and embarrassed, and they both know people nearby might already have noticed the spectacle they made, so they move quickly to compose themselves. They agree they must bring the situation to the others so help can be arranged, and she insists softly that whatever happened was an accident and not something he should punish himself for. She keeps the tone steady and protective as she cups his face, making the point that blame will not fix what needs fixing right now. Acteon manages a quiet thanks and admits that surviving the experience feels unreal, and he wonders how he could have been guided through it at all. He carries her for a short stretch and thinks about resonance and rank, realizing the odds of stumbling into the right connection are slim, but that something about their contact made the difference this time. The faculty convene and then confirm something unprecedented, announcing that Lilliope Ortis has reached S rank as a guide. She hears the formal declaration with a cool face, even as the world around her shifts to accommodate the new status, and the certification spreads instantaneously through the institution's channels. Lilliope thinks privately that her rank situation is now totally unsettled and that she could use real rest after the crisis, but the certification process will not let her rest. She recognizes that her body and mind are both exhausted, and she resents that the institution's clock will force her into further evaluation instead of allowing a moment to recover. Because the awakening triggered an S rank, Lilliope must undergo rank reassessment through the night, while professors bustle in a fever of paperwork and consultation. She is bone-tired and keeps counting the minutes until she can return to the dorm, noting how the entire faculty has been thrown into a frenzy over her unexpected change. She reviews the logic that makes the case stranger. She survived an event that should have killed or ruined a guide, and instead emerged as an S-rank guide herself. The thought that an awakening should normally stabilize rank feels overturned here, and she admits to herself that the more she reflects on it, the weirder the whole thing becomes. Faculty begin to whisper about explanations that range from the political to the conspiratorial, and some suggest the Brondern family might be manufacturing high-tier transcendence through exposure or experiment. Lilliope hears the suggestion and understands how the rumor will spread, because people always look for control and chaos, and a family with influence makes a convenient scapegoat. She mocks the officials for spouting nonsense with straight faces, while also conceding that the idea of artificial factors is not entirely implausible, since Brondern children have, indeed, been exposed to strong mana from an early age. Lilliope does not accept the theory as fact, but she understands why others might jump to it. She remembers that she herself was not exposed in the same way, and rejects the idea that her S rank is purely hereditary or bred, and she finds it maddening to be swept up in speculation that turns personal survival into a laboratory result. Professors talk about resonance and mutation, and she endures the questioning while mentally bristling at the insinuations. Officials remind her that the records already show she fainted during Acteon's first awakening, and that even the Brondern apothecary reported it, So there is no hiding what happened. Lilliope realizes she cannot slip a secret past their scrutiny and notes with dry irritation that people in government have very loose lips. A few voices suggest secret experiments or artificial manipulation as the cause of her sudden S rank, and Lilliope thinks that claim is over the top while outwardly treating it as wild imagination. She knows the truth of her survival, but she also knows how easily others will leap to dramatic explanations to make sense of something they do not understand. The meeting closes with a decision to move forward and file the official reports, leaving Lilliope alone long enough to wonder aloud what will come next. She feels the weight of attention starting to settle on her like a shadow, and she tries to steady herself for whatever consequences the certification and the rumors will bring. Students spot Lilliope moving through the grounds and immediately brand her as the one who jumped from B rank to S rank, whispering about mutation and staring openly. She notes it feels like being treated as an exhibit, and she hears their speculation as a chorus that refuses to be subtle about how different she now appears to them. Cathedral approaches concerned and asks about her condition, but Lilliope brusquely says she is exhausted and just wants to sleep. She appreciates the concern while also thinking that her feelings toward Cathedral have not softened, and she keeps the conversation short to avoid giving him room to pry into what she is still processing. Lilliope reflects that Cathedral carries the sort of arrogance that comes with high rank and status, and that the way he looks at others creates a distance that will likely be the main source of friction between them. The sharper sting is that he worried more about Acteon than his own family, and that misplaced priority rubs her the wrong way. Seeing Acteon's past clarifies how the Brondern children were lumped into one family by the Duke, and to men like Cathedral, the boy truly meant nothing beyond a name. From Lilliope's perspective, having lost her whole family and only Hyestin left, she cannot accept that indifference, even if she must grant the practical thanks that the concern shown saved her life. She tells herself she likely will not move forward quickly, and that comfort, if it comes at all, will be small and fragile, yet better than nothing. Cathedral states his intention to return to the dorm and leaves her to sort through the quiet ache of what survival has taken from her. She grows sensitive to the problem looming at the center of everything, realizing that if news of her awakening spreads to the Duke, he will almost certainly try some political maneuver to keep both her and Acteon under his thumb. The possibility that he will use policy or spectacle to seize control keeps her uneasy and watchful. She thinks of Acteon alone in isolation, imagining how he must replay every scene in his head, and she worries that when his enforced seclusion ends, he will be left to untangle tears by himself. The thought that he will be overthinking and alone makes her resolve to keep an eye on his fate. She lets the worst possibility form in her mind, picturing Acteon trapped by similar circumstances to his mother and imagining that if the Duke treats him as a threat, he will be discarded. That scenario makes her certain of one thing, that nothing good will come to Acteon if powerful men decide he is too dangerous to live freely. The memory of how dangerous awakenings have been handled sits heavy, and Lilliope cannot shake the fear that an uncontrollable transcendent would simply be disposed of under the pretense of public safety. She exhales and tells herself she must do whatever is necessary to keep Acteon from suffering that fate again. She holds the small token of what really mattered through the ordeal, the safety of herself and Hyestin, and she allows a rare softness as she treasures that simple truth. Even so, Acteon keeps creeping back into her thoughts and disturbing the neatness of her plans, and she wonders why the boy who means so little to others keeps messing with her head.